Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 539th Board meeting of the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. I would like to introduce the board members and staff at this time. On my far left is Carmen Ramirez of Atwater. Sitting between Carmen and myself is John Constantino of Grass Valley. On my far right is Bob Schneider of Davis, and on my right is, between Bob and myself, is Denise Cadera of Allensworth, and my name is Carl Longley of Fresno. We're very happy to have Tam Dudek, State Board member, with us today, and Tam will be available later to tell us what's going on at the State Board. I'll now introduce the Executive Officer, who will introduce her staff.
Good morning, Dr. Longley, members of the board. Excuse me. Across the room, to my far right is Brett Braidman, a Staff Services Manager in the office, and next to Brett is Andrew Altavogt, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and next to Andrew is Nathan Jacobson, Senior Staff Counsel for the board. To my far left is Kieran Lanfranchi Rizzardi, sorry Kieran, Executive Assistant to the board. Next to Kieran is Adam Lapitz, I'm really having a struggle this morning with saying anything. Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and to my immediate left is Patrick Palupa, Senior Staff Counsel for the board, and to my right is Andrew Dieringer, Staff Counsel for the board. In the audience, there's Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in the Fresno office, Clint Schneider, Assistant Executive Officer in the Redding office, and Linda Bracamani, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and there are a number of staff in the audience as well.
Thank you very much. Denise, would you please lead us in the salute?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And before we go on to the minutes, I'd like to announce that on the agenda, item 19, the Malakoff-Diggins State Historic Park item has been pulled off the calendar today and will be heard at a later date. We'll move now to approval of the minutes, April 16th, 17th board meeting minutes. Denise has moved.
And I'll second.
Carmen has seconded. Any discussion, comments, changes?
I was not at the Thursday, April 16th meeting, so I will abstain from that.
Okay. Roll call. Barely hear you.
And before you call the roll, the other thing is I left early before the last item was heard on Friday, and it also shows that I was absent on one of the days when I wasn't. So
We need to make that correction to the minutes.
There's two. There's the June.
Right.
This is June, the other one.
right, and we're only approving the April minutes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
You okay?
Yeah, the correction is on the April minutes. It's on Friday, April 17th. Oh, never mind. I was gone that day. I'm confused. Yeah. Can I withdraw my second, given that I was absent on Friday, the 17th?
I was gone one day, she was on the next.
Okay. Can we do these separately, Patrick, on day by day?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you want to amend your motion to the making that April 16th?
Yes. I so move that we approve the agenda for April 16th.
Are there any changes to make for April 16th? Good. Call the roll, please.
Ms. Ramirez,
Yes.
Mr. Costantino,
Abstain.
Mr. Schneider, Ms. Cordova,
Yes.
Dr. Longley.
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. Can we have a motion on the April 17th?
I'll move the
minutes?
April 17th meeting minutes.
Second.
And it's seconded by Denise. Any changes? Corrections? Call the roll.
Mr. Costantino,
Aye.
Ms. Ramirez,
I'll abstain.
Mr. Schneider, Ms. Cordova,
Yes.
Dr. Longley.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So we'll move to the June 4th and 5th board meeting, the minutes for that.
I'll move to approve those minutes both days.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Carmen moved, John seconded.
I'm going to abstain on both days because I was doing my jury service.
Okay. Very good. Call the roll, please.
Ms. Ramirez.
Yes.
Mr. Costantino. Mr. Schneider. Ms. Cordova.
Yes.
Dr. Longley.
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you.
Those are like the hardest minutes to
I
approve
know, this
from the whole
was,
entire time I've been on the board.
This is really an amazing experience. So, with that, we'll move to item 12 on the agenda. In order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and efficient manner, we'll be proceeding in accordance with the meeting procedures that have been provided with the summary agenda and are available here at the staff table and upon request, and are posted on the board's website and are summarized also on the computer screens during the breaks. Any questions regarding these procedures may be directed to Karen Lanfranchi Rosardi, our administrative assistant, sitting over here to my right at the staff table. Moving to item number 13, board member communications. Do we have anything to report today? Seeing none, I'd like to report that on the 3rd and 4th of November, the California Bioresources Alliance will be holding their meeting. Who is the California Bioresources Alliance? It is a group of individuals who are working in that area, and it's primarily headed up, as far as administrative support is concerned, by Region 9 of the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. That meeting on the 3rd and 4th November will be held in this room here, and it is focused on biosolids and manure management. So anybody having an interest in that certainly is welcome to attend. With that said, we'll move to item number 4 on the agenda, which is the State Board Liaison update by State Board Member Tam Dudek.
Speak. It's different beyond the side of the dais.
It certainly is.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me a few minutes. I just wanted to remark, I once attended a regional board meeting, not this one, where the board members spent 2 hours discussing the minutes. So consider yourself extremely efficient. What's happening at the State Water Board? Well, I'm pleased to report we released the conservation numbers for July based on what was reported to us, and I'm sure you've heard by now that the numbers were extremely promising. I think all of Californians deserve a round of applause for the tremendous effort that has been put into conservation. The data we have shows that with 405 agencies reporting, that's 99% really out of 411 throughout the state. We achieved a conservation rate of 27.3% in June as compared to last year, which is over the 25% the governor required. But it's also, need to keep in mind that we're heading into, 2 more, well, at least 1 or 2 more really hot months of the year. So the effort needs to continue, but I think we're off to a really, really great start. And I think everyone deserves recognition for the work that they've done. I think what's most impressive to me is out of the 411 agencies, the majority of them are meeting or within very close proximity of meeting their targets, and there are only 16 where they're 15% beyond their targeted rates. And so we'll be working with those. But again, very, very promising start. I also wanted to give you well, drought-related, but not just drought. A couple of items that are coming up before the State Water Board that I know you and your executive officer and staff have been very engaged in and very interested in. First is the general WDR on compost operations. That's before us actually next Tuesday. And I know that your staff has been involved in that as well. And then at the next August meeting, which is 2 weeks from next Tuesday, actually next Wednesday, we'll be holding a special workshop on the draft stormwater initiative that State Board staff has released. That's been an ongoing effort for quite a while, and it's been our hope that this stormwater strategic initiative will lay the foundation in terms of how we look at stormwater, how we look at managing and regulating stormwater as a resource going into the future. So I expect that to be a very robust discussion later on in August. Also coming in August is the grazing issue. You've had an interest in that as well, and the State Board, working with your staff, held a couple of meetings earlier this year on the subject of grazing. I expect that staff will also be releasing and proposing to the board in August a resolution to sort of discuss where we go next with respect to grazing operations. And then finally, one other update. The issue of anti-degradation as applied to groundwater, that's one that is, I think, of a great deal of interest to many people. And the staff has completed its initial outreach meetings with the various stakeholder groups. And State Board staff is in the process right now of briefing board members on next steps. And it is also my hope and expectation that the staff will be bringing to the board later on this year a proposal, a resolution, a framework of some sort to deal with the issue of groundwater anti-degradation, where we go from here, addressing both overarching policy issue, but also laying the groundwork for, I think, additional work on the more detailed technical aspects, such as baseline, such as a myriad of other things that has complicated this process. From my perspective, I'll just share with you that my first priority, as indicated to staff, is to find a pathway to develop the tools that we as water boards need in order to carry out our responsibilities for protecting groundwater. There are obviously a lot of interest in various legal aspects, and we can spend a lot of time, I think, trying to navigate those waters. But for me, the most important product that I want out of this effort are tools for us as regulators to use to effectively carry out our mission and to fully implement the charges that we're faced with. Easier said than done, but I think we need to have that kind of a focus, and I would like the State Board to outline and frame that focus before staffs go forward and spend a lot of time and resources developing whatever that next step happens to be. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions by? Yes, John.
Only thanks for the update. Appreciate the continued liaisoning that you do. There's a lot of issues that you brought up. The drought is obviously a statewide issue, but the anti-degradation and the grazing, sort of are at the heart of what we're going to be doing here going forward. So I just appreciate it and enjoy your Friday.
Thank you, and I really appreciate, I'm sure you're aware that there's been tremendous engagement by your staff and your executive officer in all of these efforts, so really appreciate that.
Well, that's good, because that's what I was going to suggest, is that, given that our region is so big and sometimes we face issues that are certainly different than the other regions, we certainly appreciate, that the State Board would, certainly include our staff in making sure that, that the framework that's developed is something that's certainly workable given our size and challenges being inland and arid in so many of our places. So thank you.
Any further comments?
I just had a question for Tam. When you spoke about drought and you said that we were, beginning to meet a lot of the 25%, and I'm imagining that a lot of the cities are all participating. How are the rural communities doing as far as meeting that number? I know in our community, the little rural communities, they're nowhere near. So I'm just curious, how are we going to be looking at
Yes.
addressing the rural communities and them measuring up to that 25% reduction?
Thank you for bringing that up. Amongst the 16 or more or so agencies that are, I would say, in the categories that having the most challenges, many of them are rural communities. And so what State Board staff will be doing is, get in touch with those agencies, get more information on what's going on, find out what some of the challenges are, and discuss ways where we can perhaps provide assistance, either through technical funding, if we can, and coordinate with other agencies such as DWR, CEC, those that have other sources of funding and technical expertise to bring these water agencies, hopefully, closer to the goal. It's an ongoing challenge, and it's not one that will be easily fixed, but I think what impresses me the most so far is the engagement of all the water agencies, rural, urban, large, small, throughout the state. Californians are truly pulling together, and we're starting to see the results of that.
A concern of mine with the rural communities is, first of all, two challenges. One that they face is some of these communities have grow operations that the county sheriff department hasn't shut down, and those grow operations pull tremendous amounts of water. The second one is that these communities typically are people who are economically disadvantaged, and many of them grow gardens. And I've seen the numbers in the past on the amount of water used for that. That's an important part of their diet. And so when we say arbitrarily that, well, you need a certain amount of water for domestic use, they're not watering lawns, and they're not growing shrubbery necessarily. They're growing food that goes on their table. So how you factor this in, I think, is very important. I think it needs to be taken into the consideration.
Good point.
Any further questions?
Yeah, Carmen, you mentioned the size of our water board, and I didn't know how you were defining that. I didn't know if you were talking about acres or counties or the number of permits we issue or the number of enforcement actions we undertake, the number of marijuana plants that are grown, the number of water bodies that are in our district, the number of irrigated land acres. So there's,
I'm sorry, can you repeat that list?
yeah, all I can add to it.
Or all of those together. Thank you, Tam. The issues you mentioned, oh my God, it just shows how busy the state board is, how complex these
That was just a
these
short
issues.
list,
And that
Mr.
was a short
Chairman.
list, and each of those is so complex, has so many issues dealing with, sub-issues, if you will, dealing with it. However, with that said, the one that really has my interest right now is the one dealing with composting. And I'm seeing an effort and a good faith effort to try to meet the quota that's been set for composting, and that's important. But we can't throw the baby out with the wash water. We have to make sure that we look at water quality and ensure that water quality goals are attained. And I'm seeing that some people want to slough over that, it appears to me. I think our challenge is to make sure it's not sloughed over. There seems to be a very strong concern about air quality and not the same concern about water quality. And each are very, very important. So that's kind of the thing that's bugging me these days as we move down the road on the composting issues. And I read the general order. I'm looking forward to your board hearing that general order and taking action on it.
So am I.
Thank you very much.
One last comment.
Oh, we have one last comment.
I'm going back to drought again, and I would just like to suggest that any materials that can be disseminated to the rural communities, particularly the disadvantaged communities, in Spanish, for them to understand the crisis that we're in. We have the information out on the highway and so forth, but it needs to actually get down into the communities. Some of the communities, Porterville, they don't have water, but the other communities where people don't have a sense of this crisis, And I just don't want to see the disadvantaged communities be the last one to leave the train station on this. So any information can be disseminated down. You talked about the community engagement, any kind of workshops. I think it would just be very important to try to get that out as soon as possible, because I'm working with our district manager right now that's trying to address the issues, and I'm just seeing people not having a clue, and that part needs to change, because I think that will make the difference. And I always say it, take it to the children in the schools, because they're the ones that help the parents realize what needs to happen. Thank you.
Thank you for that great suggestion. I will certainly follow through on that. And you know, I have to say, though, that as great as Californians is doing, I actually did my part this last week in reporting a water waster. So, you know, regardless of how well we're doing so far, and there are still, I think, a great deal that we need to do in terms of outreach and education, you know, all around the state, because there are still people, I think, that either are not entirely convinced that we're in a drought, or feel that there are so little that they can do that, you know, why? And so I think the message is that everyone's effort is valuable and is contributing to the solution, but the outreach component is extremely important.
Carl,
Yes.
I just wanted to add a description of the size. I was pretty sure you were going to add pounds of salt in the Central Valley.
Well, thanks for reminding me. David Corey will haunt me forever that I didn't suggest that.
But what that really all means is a compliment to our staff and the work they get done and that they do with all of these issues, and also to the regulatory community. You know, the amount of outreach, public outreach, and stakeholder involvement that our staff does is rather exemplary, and that's a compliment to the staff and the regulatory community that participates in all that action. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's on the order of 14 trillion pounds of salt a year. So, and that comes from the S-Salts group. We'll move on to agenda item 14, the public forum. Do I have any cards? And this public forum is for individuals wishing to speak on items that are not on today's agenda. I have a card from Laurel Firestone.
Thank you. So I was, Community Water Center is fortunate enough to have been awarded so far the only disadvantaged community SEP, at least that we know of, that has been awarded through the new Disadvantaged Community SEP program, and so in the past over a year, there's been multiple projects that fill a really important need of exactly the outreach and education to rural disadvantaged communities around everything from understanding water quality in their homes, what they can do about it in terms of immediate and long-term solutions, engaging in the regional planning, whether it's SIGMA or IRWIMS or regional plans looking at consolidation to develop solutions. Or we have a program also around private well testing that's including a number of water contaminants, but also looking at well sounding for drought impacts. That's only really been possible because of support through the SEP program. We're in the midst of our, we're going to be reporting soon on the first milestone, which will get reported to this board by the Rose Foundation that is administering that program. But just wanted to emphasize how important that program is, how much we appreciate it. We're really looking forward to showing you some of the impacts that have been made possible through it. And also just note the need to continue to fund more. There's really wonderful projects, I think at least 14 or 15 or more waiting on that list that haven't been able to be funded yet that are really critical. And we just hope that it's possible to be continuing to move funding when there's pollutions and fines, to encourage that funding to get to some of these services and communities that really need it the most, and particularly in our region. So wanted to emphasize that and look forward to sharing some of the milestones at our first big report. So. Thank you.
We'll enjoy reading those milestones, I'm sure. Any questions or comments? Thank you very much. Yes, Colin?
I think you have my card.
No, I didn't get it.
There should be a card for Colin Bailey.
I know Colin. Go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Colin Bailey. I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water. We are a statewide organization that is, as the name suggests, a coalition of grassroots member organizations, including Community Water Center and many other wonderful groups. I'm here also to add on to Laurel's comments about the supplemental environmental projects. We are among those 14 approved projects, and I want to explain to you a little bit about what ours is. But just wanted to offer you a word of congratulations for the pioneering work that you've done in the area of SEPs. You may not be aware at the statewide level that it is in fact catching fire with Department of Toxic Substance Control, many of the Cal EPA boards, divisions, and offices, and including at the state legislative level with AB 1071. There's a lot of action on this and a lot of interest and a lot of good to be done. As Laurel mentioned, there are 14 really wonderful projects, many of them represented by community organizations that are a part of EJCW. And just if there's one word that can sum up kind of the catalytic impact of a SEP, I'll take some of the work, not of ours in the Central Valley, but in the Central Coast. We received a $50,000 investment, which is what is pending before you, and leverage that within 1 year's time into $1 million worth of planning funds for outreach, education to disadvantaged communities, mapping work, and planning work, which at the end of 2016 should look like a region-wide application for funding for no fewer than probably 10 to a dozen communities. We can't promise that every time, but what we can say is that there's a great opportunity for your investment in SEPs to leverage a lot of good work to be done in the future. And so we are looking forward to working with you and with your staff. We've received some money here in the Sacramento region for those who are familiar with the IVAN model. Help me out with this, Andrew. It's the investigation of
we'll take
violations
the acronym.
affecting neighborhoods. It's basically community-based environmental reporting. And we look forward to working with your staff to launch that, and think that has a close relationship with some of the SEP work that you might do in the future. So thank you again for your leadership on that, and we look forward to much more to come.
Well, thank you, Colin, for coming in front of the board today. Any questions, comments?
Now, I'd just like to thank he and Laurel for the work they do in the disadvantaged communities. You are the voice for the communities that not only don't have an understanding, but know that there's a problem, they don't know how to get to it and get it addressed. So the efforts and the work that you put into dealing with the water issues on behalf of all of those disadvantaged communities is definitely commendable and is making a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Move on to item 15, the Executive Officer's Report. Is there any discussion at this time?
No, Dr. Longley, but I have a number of awards unless anyone
I
has a
see
question
that.
about the report. Oh, I am so sorry. There is something.
Yes.
Do you want to do that first and then the awards, or should I do the awards first? Let me do the awards.
Let's do the awards, and then we'll go to Andrew.
Yes.
And good.
There are a number of people getting an award today, but some of them are in a group. So I will first call Pam Buford from our Fresno office as Senior Staff Environmental Scientist. Is Pam here? Oh. So Pam's receiving this award today for her outstanding work in 3 areas: her CV salts involvement, her implementing the region's groundwater strategy, and for her basin planning efforts. Pam works in our Fresno office and works mostly on projects for the entire region. She competently and consistently completes assignments. She often serves as a board representative in coordinating with the CV Salts Initiative and takes frequent trips to Sacramento to attend meetings. She keeps executive management apprised of the work and represents the board interests well in all meetings. She wrote and maintained the Central Valley Board's groundwater protection strategy, which was, it sounds so easy to say, it was an extensive effort of stakeholder outreach. She tracks implementation, keeps program managers responsible with implementations and keeping them on task, and reports at each regional board meeting the progress of implementation, either in the EO report or in verbal presentations. She's also been very helpful in assisting the basin planning staff in completing the triennial review of the Tulare Lake Basin Plan. Young staff assigned to assign the review in the Fresno office did not have much experience in completing the review of the basin plan, and Pam served as a coach, and I'm having such a hard time speaking today, I'm sorry, coach and a mentor, and assisting the staff with completion of the review. Pam's work is of excellent quality. She has often been challenged to take on projects that require a lot of coordination and cooperation with other staff and outside stakeholders, and succeeds in getting that cooperation, and her work is outstanding, the quality of her work. She attends many workshops with stakeholders, and her customer service skills are excellent. Her presentations are clear and concise. She understands the mission of the board and presents that mission well to the public and other agencies. She keeps abreast of work by other agencies like the Department of Water Resources and coordinates review of the DWR, Department of Water Resources, grant applications that relate to water quality. For these reasons and many, many more, Pam is deserving of this recognition. Pam has been truly invaluable for me. She's really been helpful.
I might add that Pam routinely, as Chloe and other members of the Fresno office do, get up in the early hours of the morning when most people are still sleeping to launch themselves out on that horrid stretch of highway known as Highway 99.
Now,
And,
Caltrans is a sister agency, Dr. Longley.
I recognize.
They love that freeway.
But that's fine. But we certainly need public transportation so people like
It's called
Pam and Clay can rest on the
high-speed
train.
rail, Dr. Longley.
That's right.
Don't bring that up. Okay.
If only they had a plane.
Well, Dr. Longley can accommodate him there. No, let me stay on task here. So our next set of awards are honoring a group of individuals that I have a high value for in our office, because they're the ones who really do the work to keep this place running and to provide a service to our technical staff and management so that we can get our jobs done easily without having to do a lot of extra work. And that's our clerical staff. So today we're recognizing Jacqueline Gonzalez from the Fresno office. She's an outstanding employee from the time she started working for the regional board. She's a seasonal clerk in the board there. She arrived with a positive attitude, a willingness to learn anything and everything, and was flexible with her schedule when we needed her to work more hours. She's a quick learner and worked hard to learn the processes in the office. Many times she has been the only person working in the front office due to an unexpected absence of our office technician. Jacqueline often processes large volume of daily letters, opens, sorts, and records the incoming mail, as well as assists the public at the front window, and anything else staff has asked her to do. She has performed at a level far above what can be expected as a seasonal clerk, and is always pleasant and has a smile. She's a joy to work with, and an incredible asset for this office. So for that, she is being recommended for this award, and she's highly deserving of it. So thank you, Jacqueline. So in our Sacramento office, we provide, and I should say, we are not ignoring Reading. That will be next board meeting. So in the Sacramento office, we have a number of administrative staff that I'd like to recognize. Annalise Burney, Camille Hang, she's not here today. Della Kramer is not available today. Heen Tran, who's here. Catherine Barksdale, who doesn't come in till 10 o'clock. Kiri Kiri Yee, Marianne Walton, Michael Hoffman, Renee Smith, Scott Mills, and Stephen Thompson. Sorry, no. This is a great group of individuals. So they are being recognized they just need to be recognized. This is a group of individuals who just sort of stay hidden from the public for a lot of time, and I so honor the administration staff and the support staff and the clerical staff because they just do the work, and sometimes it's a very thankless job that they do. So in the past year, the administration team in the Sacramento office has provided exemplary service, including assuming all the duties for the board meetings to ensure there's adequate coverage. We used to have technical staff who would sit at the front desk and take care of your lunch and all the other things that take. Now we have the administration staff do that. It's released our technical staff so they could go do their work. So having them provide that service freed up our technical staff time. They've developed a training program for people to use our state vehicles. It seems like it would be so easy to use our state vehicles, but we have a special card, and you have to know how to use the card in order to put fuel in it and all these other things. So they've developed that process. And I learned I had to be trained on even how to check out a car. So that's part of the training, too. We've done a rollout of the electronic content management paper. Our documents now are coming in electronically and being stored electronically. So that was done this last month. They handle over more than 500 emails a month, and that number is growing. They've developed a tracking system for staff training and developing reports so that staff can keep track. Our staff have mandatory training that's required, and then they also have some voluntary. So there's a way to track to make sure our staff and management stay on task. And then they've developed some emergency procedures manual and provided training to staff that volunteer as emergency responders. And recently we just had our test of our fire system in this building. That hadn't been done for quite a while. They also do they do our mailing, they do our filing, they do the stacking and supplying of all of the workstations out there so that staff doesn't have to spend time trying to find paper, pencils, and everything else they need just in their daily business. So for all of these things that they do and more, they're being honored today. So Mary Ann, want to come up? Michael Hoffman. Oh, he's hiding. Some people don't like to come in public spaces. Renee Smith. Stephen Thompson. Annalise Burney. Camille Heng? No? Oh, that's right, she's not here. Heen Tran, she's here. Sorry about this. Scott Mills. And Kiri Yee. We'll have pictures now.
Well, I'll just say that, coming to the state board can't be easy. I mean, it's intimidating. People come in, they know they want help, they don't quite know how to start, and it makes such a difference when somebody who's pleasant and smiling and seems to care about their concern is at the front window. And I've certainly felt that way. I feel it when I go to the Fresno office, not only with front staff, but everybody. And I mean, everybody's standing there. I see them, they're friendly, and it makes all the difference. So, your efforts don't go unnoticed. We really appreciate you. So thank you.
I have to echo Carmen's comments, and first impressions are very important, and you are the folks that give the first impression. You do a good job at it. Thank you.
I'd just like to say, in my years in city government, it was always good. My life was much easier when I had support staff that did the work effortlessly, and all the things that you mentioned, just committed to doing a good job. And working behind the scenes is a great job. So many times, you know, everybody wants to be out front, but it's the behind the scenes person that keeps the wheel turning and everything working. And I'm just glad to see you being recognized, and just to all of the staff for this organization. I just commend you for your professionalism, being on task, and just doing an exemplary job for this group, this board. We're very proud of the work that you do, and congratulations to you all.
Thank you. So
Mr. Out of Oak.
Thank you, Dr. Longley. Actually, where's the keyboard and the mouse for this? Sorry, just a second. We need to load up a presentation. Sorry. Yeah, so I'm while we're figuring this out, I want to introduce to the board Melissa Rothstein. And Melissa is going to be starting her second year at the vet school at UC Davis in the fall. And she's been with us for the past 2 months or so as a summer intern. And Melissa's been working on a topic you heard some about yesterday, actually, from Sustainable Conservation. We asked her to spend some time looking at dairy waste management issues, and specifically flush versus scrape systems at dairies and some of the positive benefits, pros and cons of that. And so she's going to give a short presentation on that. She's also going to be writing up a short report on that, which will be finished in the next week or so, which we can share with the board. And I just want to say Melissa has done a really fantastic job at this task. She's worked extremely hard and been very diligent, and I think you'll see that that she's done very good work. let me load up her presentation.
So while she's getting ready, you may ask why a veterinary student is coming to work for the board. But we've been working a lot with Jean Crumley with UC Davis, and Jean helps us a lot with a lot of our leadership education and coaching for our management staff and staff. And Melissa is and Jean has 3 duties, but he's also helping the School of Veterinary Medicine. And they have a process, and Melissa's interested in policy. And so Jean offered our office up because we work so much with policy and we deal with so many different issues. And so this was a great opportunity to use someone with a background in, she's interested in large animals. If you can believe this, a chicken is considered a large animal. Under her definition, I was just floored when I heard that. But an elephant is not. But that's a whole different category.
Is that a bizarro world?
Just don't get it. But anyway, so we've been so she's been able, we always talk about these cross media and looking at things in a more holistic, and so this was a golden opportunity to provide her some opportunity and also to make a board presentation so that she can see how policy works and the information that needs to go into it, and also to have a different perspective from animal health, looking at the water issues and the air issues. So this is a unique opportunity for Melissa and the board.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak this morning. Thank you to the folks here at the Water Board for having me over the summer. I kind of invited myself over after Jean connected me with the office, and everyone's been very welcoming, and I've learned a lot, so I had a great summer. Thank you very much. Like Andrew said, I'm a vet student at UC Davis. I'm interested in large animals, which means agricultural animals, and how that intersects with policy issues. So to learn a little bit more about dairy waste management systems, I did comb through the literature, but I also just talked to a bunch of people. I went out with our staff here, our inspectors, and went on farm inspections, spoke with dairy farmers. I went to the short-lived climate pollutant meeting and the healthy soils meeting and met with folks at CDFA and ARB. And I went over to the university and talked with faculty and scientists and called up veterinarians that I used to work with and just got everyone's input. And I really learned a lot from a lot of different perspectives. So I just wanted to share with you what I learned this summer. So most of this you know, but dairy is a big industry in California. It also contributes to, it's a source of water and air contamination. And a big part of mitigating that environmental effect is looking at the way we manage manure. And some of this will be a little bit repetitive from Ashley Bourne's presentation yesterday, but repetition is a very good study habit. So, so most farms in California use a flushing method of dealing with manure. And most of them have storage lagoons, and a lot have some method of separating liquid and solid manure and then using the solid component for cow bedding. These are some of the main stakeholders that I looked at. State and local agencies are responsible for mitigating a lot of those environmental impacts. They also have these shared goals of protecting the consumers, of making sure the industry succeeds. And although they share common goals, each focuses on different elements. So for example, the Water Board is very concerned with land application of liquid manure, whereas ARB is looking at digesters to control methane. So they're all working on all of these different projects. The dairy industry is obviously a very big stakeholder in the matter. And this includes a lot of different components within that group. They don't all necessarily have the same interests. But in general, the dairy industry has had some hard years lately. In 2009, milk prices were very low. We lost about 100 farms that year. And in general, the industry is trending towards fewer farms with more cows per farm and higher production per cow. So the industry really needs solutions that are economically feasible and practical and sustainable in the long term. The public is obviously a stakeholder in the matter. And then animal health and welfare, and this is kind of where I come in from my veterinary perspective. I was really interested to see the effects of these different waste management systems on animal health. And two of the biggest issues in dairy farms are mastitis and hoof issues. And in California, you have a high prevalence of something called hairy foot warts, which is not a wart, it's actually a bacterial infection. So the waste management has a lot to do with the prevalence of these infections. So again, flush systems are the most prevalent system used to collect waste on California dairies. We have a very favorable climate here for it. Farmers really seem to like this system. They say that it's easier to deal with, less labor and maintenance. It's cleaner for the cows, easier to get rid of the manure. But the con of this system is it gives us a large volume of liquid waste to deal with, which could be a concern for water quality. And when I came in not knowing a whole lot about these systems, I thought, well, this is a very wet system. And the key tenet of cow hoof health and for mastitis is to keep the cows clean and dry. And I thought, well, if you're flushing the barns, that's probably causing some problems with cow health. And so one thing that folks are looking at recently, ARB is looking at using cap-and-trade funding to convert some of these flush systems to a scrape system, which would help control methane. And it could also, these systems do produce less liquid waste, so we'd have less liquid waste to manage. And I thought, well, if it's a drier system, it could be good for cow health as well. So I went out and talked with a lot of people about scrape systems, and I found that there are some downsides to this system. The farmers don't like it as much. They say the cows are a lot dirtier. It's harder to apply the manure to the fields. It's more mechanical, so there's more labor and maintenance involved from their perspective. And the concern from the animal health perspective is that there are some cow injuries that tend to happen on these scrape facilities. At least anecdotally, I talked to some farmers who said they lost a significant number of their cows to slipping injuries, because when you're scraping the manure out of the barn, it's not a dry substance, so you create either a film of manure that's slippery for the cows, or you can also, if you're using a steel blade, actually scrape the concrete smooth. And concrete needs to have texture not only for the hoof health, because it wears the hooves evenly, but also if it's smooth, the cows will slip and sustain injuries and have to be euthanized. So that's a concern for the cow welfare and health. Also, something that our inspectors shared with me, because they do go out on some scrape facilities in our region, and they said what they've seen going out on scrape facilities is that sometimes, since this manure is hard to manage, they've seen manure pile up on these farms, and then the cows are standing in manure, so that they're not actually drier in that instance. So the idea of converting a existing flush system to a scrape system could have some of those unintended consequences. The exception would be if we were to build a new farm, which isn't happening a lot right now, but if we were to, there are some great new technologies coming out. One vet told me about vacuum scrapes, and these trucks will vacuum up the manure, and then it's in a truck, so it's a lot easier to take it to where it needs to go so it doesn't pile up on or near the barns. But again, that would require some infrastructure, so it would be more feasible on a new farm. Some other ideas that people are considering: anaerobic digesters, and you can either build an anaerobic digester or cover an existing lagoon. This could use cap-and-trade funding, and right now CDFA is funding a few digester projects. And the nice thing about the CDFA funded projects is that they have to double line their lagoons, so that would have some secondary positive impacts for water quality. Solid liquid separation. These are all pictures from a farm that we visited on an inspection that I thought was just the cleanest farm I had seen. It operated really well as far as I could tell. And the key to that was they had really elaborate solid liquid separation. So they had a weeping wall and settling basin and mechanical separators. And they ended up with a solid material that could be used for composting, as well as another finer solid material that was used for the cow bedding. And the liquid fraction went into the lagoon, but then had a lower level of particulate matter. So the farmer that I spoke with said that he actually saw an improvement in cow health in terms of incidence of hoof issues and mastitis, because he felt that his lagoon water was cleaner when it was being flushed through the barns.
Do you remember what the size of that farm was, that dairy? Just if you remember.
I don't, but Jennifer Bickstrom? 2,500? 2,500 to 3,000.
Okay.
It's-
And do you remember what county it was in?
Merced.
Merced. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. These are my backup. So another thing that folks are paying a lot of attention to now is composting, which has a lot of co-benefits for a lot of different agencies, and folks are really coming together to work on this issue, which is nice to see. Pasture I bring up just because I think it gets dismissed pretty readily a lot of times as just really difficult or infeasible in California, but there are some regions or circumstances under which it would be feasible, and you would have to have fewer cows on greater land. But if it's paired with USDA organic certification, it could potentially be profitable for farmers. So it's something that warrants looking at, I think. And when I talked with nonprofit groups about this issue, a lot of them really wanted to see more pastured cows. So I think those groups could gather consumer involvement and support for that, because I think this is something that consumers also want to see. I talked with one farmer on an inspection, and he said he's worked on all kinds of dairies, industrial scale dairies, and he said, I've never had a picture of any of my farms on my wall, but I have a picture of cows on pasture on my wall at home. So I think it's just sort of this romantic idea that a lot of people think of when they think of dairy cows and maybe want to see more of. So in conclusion, some of the main suggestions I would have from my perspective, coming from the outside, number one, good management is key. So I don't think it's as simple as, is it a scrape system or a flush system? But whatever the system is, it has to be managed really well, and it has to be appropriate to the individual farm. And so when we're making suggestions, they have to be sort of a menu of options and very flexible for farmers, so that they have several best management practices to look at. Am I doing that? Okay. Moving forward with good technologies that we're already in favor of. So composting, again, has a lot of co-benefits. It also has some concerns from air quality standpoint and potentially water quality. So looking at those, but moving forward where we can to provide those benefits. Solid liquid separation, I think, is a really important aspect of manure management, and provides a lot of the benefits that converting a flush system to a scrape system would provide on a smaller scale, but a lot lower tech. And better measurement of nutrient application is something we really need. And there's the typo on this one, but digesters should be done with support from agencies so that they're doing things like double lining the lagoons and they're meeting the regulations and making sure that they're sustainable in the long term, because we have tried to implement digesters in the past and a lot ended up failing. So I think farmers have a little bit of skepticism towards that technology. So it's important to support them if that's something we're looking at. And finally, collaboration is really key. I thought it was great that Ashley Boren came in yesterday with her perspective from a nonprofit. And a lot of the scientists I spoke with at UC Davis were really eager about the idea of collaborating with the Water Board on research projects so that we can have more data to substantiate these systems. Agencies definitely need to work together towards these common goals and find solutions that work really well for all of us. And finally, the farmers are a great resource. So farms like the one that I showed you pictures of, he's doing a really good job. He's really trying to comply with regulations. He's investing a lot in different technologies. And he's also experimenting on all of his farms with composting and with different forms of irrigation and different forms of tilling. And he's collecting data on all of those things. So that's someone we could go to and say, hey, you're doing a really great job. We want all that information you're gathering. We want you at the table to tell us how this should be done, how we can find a solution that really works for farmers and for the environment. And similarly, this office has tons of great resources. The folks who just answered your question have seen tons of farms. They know all about them. So So that kind of collaboration, I think, could help us come up with some creative solutions.
Thank you very much. Among the professors you worked with at researchers at UC Davis, have you spoken to Dr. Zhang by chance? Ruheng Zhang?
No, I may have read an article.
Yes,
but
I
didn't.
think you need to talk to her. One of the issues on anaerobic digestion, as you suggested it be used here, it turns out a product that really has little commercial value. It's so low in nitrogen. And the advantage of using a scrape or vacuum technology, and by the way, vacuum's been around for quite a while. The vacuum technology is to, you concentrate the nitrogen, you don't have as large a footprint, and you have typically a digester that produces a product if you followed, and Dr. Zhang has a couple of these operating at Davis. You produces a product that has shelf life and has commercial value. And so that changed the economics a bit. The thing you talked about, cow slipping, is something that needs to be worked on. A way to pick this up and leave a surface that is compatible with cows having good footing is obviously important. But thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. Any comments?
Yeah, I just want to take this opportunity to sort of interject the issue of tricolored blackbirds with dairies in the San Joaquin Valley. And last December, they were put on a 6-month listing, and then that was recently taken off. But I think that will be revisited in the habitat, or the pastures, or the habitat that some of the dairies create is really critical in the San Joaquin for tricolored blackbirds. And as we talk about dairy issues going forward, I think paying attention to this, what can be considered a side benefit or an ecological service that dairies can perform, and helping us protect tricolored blackbirds is an important issue. So I just saw a little opportunity to insert that, and I took it. But thank you very much for your presentation.
Yeah, that's great. I saw a lot of other ideas out there in papers that I don't know a whole lot about, but for example, constructing wetlands to deal with waste could also provide different kinds of habitats. So I don't know a lot about all of these technologies, but there's a lot.
Certainly.
Out there.
And in the northern climes, they tend to use more scrape or vacuum simply because
Yeah.
you don't spray when temperature's below zero. You're not spraying water around. So there's a lot to be learned from what they're doing in places like Minnesota and Wisconsin. John?
Excuse me, John, but Dr. Robert Meese at UC Davis is kind of the tricolored blackbird expert. You might have a chat with him sometime.
Yeah, I'd like to. And I agree with you, Mr. Longley, what you said about digesters. From my perspective, I don't think we're quite there yet with digesters, but they are being funded right now, I think, to make some initial progress. So if they're going to be funded, I think it's important to do them correctly. But I would tend to favor the solid liquid separation, to be able to have some of those saleable products that you're talking about. And then where it is appropriate, if you could have a scrape system. I really love in theory, the vacuum scrape, because it picks up the manure and you get it away from the cows, and then you can actually do something with it, like you're talking about.
Well, in fact, in parts of the U.S. where they do practice this, it becomes an important part of the revenue for the dairy.
Mm-hmm.
So, John?
Morning. I was just going to say thank you. I, at one point, was a regulatory intern at an agency, and it turned into my first job. And that sort of led me on my path here. But thank you to Pamela and Andrew for having interns. I think combining technical with policy is a key aspect, and bringing folks in to show them what government does and what can be done is valuable. And appreciate your service, and I enjoyed the presentation. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was really enjoyable for me. I told them if they would hire me, I'll drop out of vet school.
Any further board comments? Thank you. So with that, we'll move to Agenda 16, this time and place for a public hearing to consider adoption of uncontested items 24 through 28. This includes MPDS permit enforcement, MPDS permits, waste discharge requirements, waste discharge requirements rescissions, and change of name and ownership. Does anyone wish to discuss any of these items? Okay. I have a card for Cassandra Trembling to talk about item 26B.
Hello, I was just here to speak for the client's behalf, and I was just here to address any comments if they came up, so I have no
Oh,
comments to make myself.
Very good. Well,
Thank
we have
you.
no new information apparently. Thank you very much. So, are you handling this, Andrew? So, we have the late revisions. Are there any other late revisions?
No, that's just the one in front of you, Dr. Longley.
Okay, are there any questions regarding the late revisions?
Just standard question, I'm assuming.
Yes, the discharger is in agreement with this, and in fact, I think a representative of the discharger is here if you had any questions.
Which
Oh, I'm sorry, this is for item on the printed agenda. It's item 26G. On the posted agenda online, it's actually 26F. There was a change to the posted agenda. So the agenda in front that the board has, it's item 26G, Recology, Yuba Sutter, and Feather River Organics.
One well is accepted and the rest of it is grammatical.
Yeah, we changed. There were a couple dates that were moved out,
Right.
and then some clarifying language to
Right.
help the discharger.
Eh. Okay, are there any questions, board members, on these items? If not, then I'll close the hearing and ask for a motion and a second.
I would move all the items with the late revisions.
Carmen's moved,
I'll second.
John seconded. Roll call, please.
Ms. Ramirez? Mr. Costantino? Mr. Schneider? Ms. Cordova?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Aye,
Motion carries.
thank you.
Carl?
Yes,
I just wanted to comment on 26H, the Woodland Davis Clean Water Agency.
sir, go ahead.
And their treatment plant. And this has been a long time in planning and development. And it's critical, I think, in this relationship between source water and your wastewater discharge. And both of these, or all three of these agencies, have had issues at times with their discharge requirements. And a lot of that's because they've been on groundwater and they have constituents in their groundwater that exceed, when they get the water, it exceeds the wastewater discharge requirements. But this plant will actually help each of these agencies meet their requirements for wastewater discharge and provide better quality water to their constituents. So this is a really good project, and I like seeing it move forward. So thank you, staff, working on this.
Thank you very much. We'll take a 10-minute break back here at 25 after for item 17 on the agenda, Grasslands Bypass Order. We're back in session. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider new waste discharge requirements for the Grasslands Bypass, and this is agenda item 17. To consider new waste discharge requirements for the Grasslands
Dr.
Bypass
Longley.
being issued.
Dr. Longley, I'm sorry. Item 22, we had it on the contested. We didn't receive any comments. We didn't receive any opposition. I'm wondering, people.
You want to
from
move it
Trace-
up?
Move it up real quickly.
So we will not start with item 17 now. We'll move to agenda item 22. This is the time and place for hearing to consider a resolution. This resolution will recommend that the State Water Board remove Tracy Unified School District from the statewide MPDS general permit for stormwater discharges from small municipal separate storm sewer systems. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed actions and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this item? Since there's no one present to contest this matter, the board will proceed based on the agenda material and the records. Are there any late revisions or staff comments? Who's handling this?
No late revisions, Dr. Longley.
Thank you very much. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
No legal issues, Dr. Longley.
Thank you very much. The hearing is now closed. The chair will entertain a motion to adopt the proposed resolution.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Bob's moved, Carmen second. Roll call.
Mr. Schneider? Ms. Ramirez? Mr. Costantino? Ms. Cordova?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. So now we'll move to agenda item 17, excuse me. This is time and place for hearing to consider new waste discharge requirements for the Grasslands bypass being issued to the United States Bureau of Reclamation and the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of public hearing and the meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. At this time, evidence should be introduced on whether the proposed action should be taken. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer I do. Thank you. Total times being allowed for testimony are as follows. Grassland Bypass Use Agreement Panel, 20 minutes. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, 5 minutes. Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Association, 5 minutes. All other persons shall limit their testimony to 3 minutes, and a timer will be used. Please state your name, address, affiliation, and whether you have taken the oath before testifying. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
We have one late comment, which Adam will address. We received a late comment letter on 29 July. Comments were due on the 22nd of June. The letter is from the Environmental Coalition, and it's a number of environmental groups. Actually, the comment letter itself, the comments in the letter are really already comments that we've seen in the previous comments and responses, but there was a report attached to the letter that addresses economics or the costs of retiring drainage impaired lands, and this is a new report. It was done in July of 2015. Staff has not had a chance to really look at this report and delve into the issues of it, so we're recommending that the late comment not be admitted into the record.
And I really not be admitted into the record. I've discussed this with staff. One of the issues that we seem to continually have is, and I don't know if we need to print this in big red letters about the size of the page, but please get your comments in on time. We let in some comments on another item that were mailed before the deadline period and received after them, but I tell you, we have to draw a line in the sand, and it's very, very important that comments be submitted in a timely fashion. And it really places a burden on this board when comments come in, and the comments may have merit, but they haven't been submitted in time. We have to keep a level playing field here. So with that said, I'll get off my tirade. We will proceed then with the staff presentation.
Good morning, Dr. Longley, members of the board. My name is Jelena Hartman. I'm the senior scientist with the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, and I will be presenting today an overview of the waste discharge requirements for the Grassland Bypass project. For simplicity, I will refer to these waste discharge requirements as the order. And the agenda material includes the proposed order, the comments received, staff response to comments, and you should also have a set of proposed late revisions. The area that the tentative order covers is the grassland drainage area shown in red on this map. And the drainage area is to the west of the San Joaquin River, which is here. And shown in blue is the West Side San Joaquin Watershed Coalition and the Westlands Water Quality Coalition, which surround the grassland drainage area. And to the north of the grassland drainage area is a complex of managed wetlands, and there are also state and federal refuges there. and we'll talk about those as well. But I will also refer back to the West Side Coalition in the presentation. And the grassland drainage area is about 97,000 acres of agricultural land, which is a part of the grassland subbasin. There are two proposed orders for regulating discharges from the grassland drainage area. The first one is Agenda Item 17, to regulate the discharges via the grassland bypass project into the surface waters. And this is essentially an update of waste discharge requirements that are currently in effect. And the second order is an order that's a part of the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, and it will provide coverage for the groundwater. That's the next item on the agenda, 18. When we talk about the grassland bypass project, a concept to bear in mind is the subsurface or tile drainage. And growing commercial crops in the area requires irrigation for virtually all crops, and without proper drainage, roots can become waterlogged. So the subsurface or tile drains act as a horizontal well that pumps out that water out of the plant root zone. And that drainage water can be discharged into surface waters. And given the area on the west side of the San Joaquin River that has elevated salt and selenium, the concern about this subsurface tile drainage is that it contains high concentrations of selenium. And of concern is that when selenium enters aquatic food webs, it can have negative effects on wildlife because selenium can biomagnify. So we are looking at that in this order as well. And historically, the discharge from the grassland bypass project used to flow directly into the wetland channels and eventually into the San Joaquin River. So this schematic shows a simplified look at the grassland drainage area shown in a yellow outline here. For orientation, the San Joaquin River is here. And the managed wetlands are, there's a south and the North Grasslands Water District complex. They're shown in green here. And the blue shows wetland channels, including mud slough and then also salt slough, and they reach the San Joaquin River eventually. And so historically, when the drainage from the grassland drainage area was discharged directly into the wetlands, as more and more tile drains were installed, the water quality in those wetland channels gradually started to change. And we are concerned about the wetlands because of potential effect on the wildlife that elevated selenium concentrations could have. And we want to protect not only the creeks and the rivers, but also the wetlands. So a big change was with the start of the grassland bypass project, which essentially consolidates drainage from the entire grassland drainage area and conveys it through a grassland bypass channel, shown in red line here, into the San Luis drain, which is this orange line. And then it discharges into the mud slough, which is a tributary of the San Joaquin River. And a stretch of mud slough and the San Joaquin River below the San Luis drain and above the Merced River are shown here in yellow because it will kind of be a focus of some of the comments and where this order is going. But Merced River brings a lot of dilution flows, so below the Merced we see a lot of dilution, and water quality objectives for selenium have been met, but this yellow stretch is what I'll refer back to. And it is worth noting that the grassland bypass project has been more than just simple rerouting of drainage. There has also been a tremendous effort to reduce the actual loads, and the loads of selenium have been decreased since the start of the project by 90% or more. In this yellow stretch of the river, there was a basin plan amendment that gave additional time to meet the water quality objectives. So while the water quality objective of 5 micrograms per liter for selenium applies in the San Joaquin River and 2 micrograms per liter of selenium in the wetland channels and wetlands, this yellow stretch of mud slough and the reach of San Joaquin between mud slough and the Merced have until the end of 2019 to meet the 5 objective. A little bit more detail about how Grassland Bypass Project is organized and how it's operated is that it is really based on the use agreement, which is an agreement to use the San Luis Drain to convey that consolidated subsurface drainage to Mud Slough. And the agreement is between the owner of the San Luis Drain, which is the Bureau of Reclamation, and the operator, which is the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority. And the Bureau of Reclamation and the Water Authority are named dischargers for this proposed order. It is worth noting that a number of other agencies, including the Regional Board, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Geological Survey, act on various committees that provide oversight to the project. And U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and National Marine Fisheries Services also provide consultation. And so there are a number of different committees. One example that I will talk about a little bit later is a DCRT, which is Data Collection and Review Team, which has representatives from these various agencies on it. A final note is about the Grassland Basin Drainage Steering Committee, which is an entity that's authorized to operate the bypass project and also to execute actions to comply with our waste discharge requirements. And it's the water districts that have organized themselves into the steering committee, and steering committee works with growers to ensure that management practices are implemented and that the project objectives are met. Again, the terms of use of the San Luis Drain are set in the use agreement between the Bureau of Reclamation and the Water Authority. And this simple timeline shows 1996 as a year when the Grassland Bypass Project started. And there have been 3 use agreements setting terms of use of San Luis Drain during that time. And the current use agreement covers the period through 2019, and it requires achieving zero discharge to San Luis Drain by the end of 2019. Each use agreement had its own environmental analysis to comply with CEQA, that's California Environmental Quality Act. Use agreements contain its performance measures that must be met, or there can be even termination of the use agreement. But the use agreement also contains a structure of incentives and fees to move the project towards the goals. Now, to provide a little bit of a broader regulatory context for the issues related to the Grassland bypass, is that in 1996, the Regional Board adopted a basin plan amendment to include a framework to regulate selenium discharges from the Grassland watershed. And to implement that basin plan amendment, the board adopted waste discharge requirements in 1998, which was essentially the first set of waste discharge requirements to regulate agricultural discharges in the Central Valley. So when the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program took off in 2003, there was no need to provide separate coverage for growers' discharges to surface waters in the grassland drainage area because they already had their WDRs, and then the irrigated lands covered the rest. Those waste discharge requirements for the bypass project were updated in 2001 to add the storm season monitoring of wetland supply channels. That's pretty much the only time when it's possible to have any subsurface drainage from the grassland drainage area be discharged into the wetlands together with commingled storm flows. Otherwise, the Grassland Bypass Project completely eliminated those subsurface discharges into the wetlands. In 2010, there was a basin plan amendment that allowed additional time to meet the 5 micrograms per liter concentration of selenium in a stretch of mud slough below the San Luis Drain and the reach of the San Joaquin between the mud slough and the Merced River, that yellow stretch that I showed on the map. And while the use agreement requires ceasing discharge by the end of 2019. The basin plan does not really go so strict about it, and as long as water quality objectives are met, there is no really prohibition of discharge. Another piece of the puzzle here was added in 2004 with the adoption of Salt and Boron Control Program. And essentially, there are a couple of key options to comply with the Salt and Boron Control Program, which also prescribed load limits for the grassland area. That is either to meet load limits and comply with the salt waste discharge requirements, or to get a waiver of the waste discharge requirements for salt. And that alternative option is to participate in an RTMP. RTMP stands for Real-Time Management Program. And there is also a management agency agreement between the regional board and the Bureau of Reclamation, where Bureau of Reclamation agreed to be the lead agency for supporting RTMP and, if necessary, even providing dilution flows to meet the salinity objective at Vernalis. Of course, final piece of the puzzle for coverage with regards to agricultural discharges came with the adoption of the waste discharge requirements for irrigated lands regulatory program during the past couple of years, which provide coverage for the groundwater. And next item on the agenda will be groundwater order to cover the last area in the Central Valley for discharges to groundwater. But first we're discussing the bypass order, and the Grassland Bypass project has by and large been a success. A lot has been achieved, both in terms of once the flows have been rerouted, that the water quality in these wetland channels and wetlands has improved dramatically. In fact, Salt Slough and reaches of San Joaquin River are no longer impaired by selenium. But it's been more than that. This chart shows total volume of discharge, total flow in acre feet in since the start of the project until 2013. And what we see is there has been a dramatic decrease in the total volume of that discharge. Looking at selenium concentrations in Mud Slough, that's this point here, right below the San Luis drain. This graph shows selenium concentrations on the y-axis, and during the last several years, this blue line shows concentrations varying across time, but there's a general trend of decrease, and in the last few years, there are periods of time when that concentration is below 5, and just to remind you, 5 is shown here in this red line, is the water quality objective that will start to apply at the end of 2019. In Mud Slough and this reach of the San Joaquin River. Finally, looking at the San Joaquin River here below the Merced River, that location is at Crow's Landing. Again, we're looking at selenium concentrations on y-axis, and this pink line shows those concentrations really decreasing in the last decade or so. The green line across the top here is 5 micrograms per liter selenium, so that objective has been met. Okay, now with an understanding how the Grassland Bypass project works and what it entails, I think it's worth revisiting the approach to have 2 orders to regulate discharges from grassland drainage area. And it's really important to understand this. This is not from a desire to overcomplexify. Rather, this Grassland Bypass project structure that has been put in place has resulted in such success that we want to keep that in place while still providing coverage for groundwater and closing that gap. So this table summarizes some of the key features of the 2 orders. The bypass project is for discharges to surface water, and the order is the waste discharge requirements, which is discharge to surface water, and there is no need to do a separate irrigated lands order. Named dischargers are the Bureau of Reclamation and the Water Authority, and as already discussed in a previous slide, the drainage is consolidated, although it's from a non-point source, it is consolidated and conveyed through San Luis Drain into the mud slough. So we have a specific location where that discharge reaches receiving waters, so that kind of determines how we can monitor water quality associated with that discharge. So we can monitor both the water quality of the discharge and immediate receiving waters. And so those compliance points are a little bit better defined. On the other hand, looking at the groundwater, which will be a part of the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program general orders, the dischargers are individual growers, but similar to other Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program orders, there is a third party representing growers, and in this case, it's the steering committee. And this is the same steering committee that is authorized to operate the Grassland Bypass project and to execute actions to comply with the waste discharge requirements. So this is an important link, that there is really one head looking at both orders and information at one time, in addition to the board. In terms of discharge location, it's a diffuse source. It's from around 97,000 acres discharged to groundwater. And this is then mirroring the approach to assessing water quality for groundwater that is in other adopted irrigated lands orders, which really relies on trend monitoring and management practices evaluation program, which are an approach to really assess the link between management practices on the surface and the impact they're having on the water quality when it comes to groundwater. Okay, now, after this kind of brief crash course into the Grassland Bypass project, actually about the proposed order. The bypass order will essentially update requirements and time schedule for compliance from the current waste discharge requirements that are in effect. The order has been extensively circulated, first released for public review and comments in May of 2014, and an additional opportunity for comments was at a board workshop last August. After direction from the board and public comments were received, that order was revised and released for another extra long comment period in May of this year. The presentation will next look at the key aspects of the proposed order. We'll look at the summary of main changes since the 2014 draft, briefly go over comments received and the staff response, and also look at what the late revisions were made. The Grassland Bypass order applies to the discharge from the Grassland Bypass project to Mud Slough and the San Joaquin River, and the named dischargers are Bureau of Reclamation and the Water Authority, and they're in charge of all the monitoring and reporting required by the order. In addition, there is a requirement to prepare management plans if there are identified issues with the water that need to be addressed through a management plan, which will then provide a tool to work with growers to make adjustments. And there is also a requirement to reduce selenium loads. And the dischargers are going to have to report annually about what their plan is to achieve it. Monitoring that's required under the order focuses on compliance with water quality of the discharge and the immediate receiving waters. So again, here it's this simplified schematic showing the grassland drainage area in yellow, and the red is the Grassland Bypass channel, San Luis Drain going into the Mud Slough, and then which goes into the San Joaquin River. And the order requires monitoring of key locations, terminus of San Luis Drain, immediate receiving waters in Mud Slough, immediate receiving waters once Mud Slough enters the San Joaquin River, and then there is another location which is downstream from the confluence with the Merced River. In addition, order requires daily monitoring during storm events at the headworks of the wetland supply channels, and both for the south and the north complex of managed wetlands. And this requirement is identical to what's required under the current order. Daily monitoring during storms and 7 weeks after. I also want to point out 4 sites here shown in turquoise. There is a location on Mud Slough that's upstream from the San Luis Drain, one location that's on Salt Slough, one location that's on the San Joaquin River upstream from Mud Slough. Those 3 locations are on the stretches of water bodies that no longer have any selenium impairment. And they essentially reflect background concentrations. So any exceedances downstream of confluence with the San Luis Drain or the Mud Slough would be responsibility of the discharger. We don't really care what's coming up from upstream because we know it's just background. But by monitoring the downstream location, discharger is going to be responsible for anything that we see there. And the 4th site shown here is essentially a substitution site that is close to Merced River. Now the order requires monitoring at a site that's closer to the discharge from Mud Slough. And this is an ongoing monitoring effort that will continue at these turquoise sites, but they're just not going to be a part of the proposed order. They're a part of the broader monitoring effort that's coordinated by DCRT, which was the Data Collection and Review Team. A number of revisions have been made to the order since we were last in front of the board last year. And there were revisions that have been made in response to comments, and I will go over them when we summarize response to comments. And then there was a number of miscellaneous changes to make corrections and clarify text, and I won't go into those. We received 9 comment letters by the deadline, and next couple of slides will summarize the gist of the comment, and then revisions made to the order or staff response to those comments will be denoted by a star and the green font here. Virtually every letter we received commented on apparent relaxation of selenium load limits in the order, and it refers to Table 2, which is in the findings, and to an annual load prohibition that's in the order. And I really want to emphasize here that selenium limits are not being relaxed by the proposed order. The order carries forward load limits from previous orders and from previous basin plan amendments. However, the order implements the more stringent objective, and so there is no relaxation of those load limits. There was an error that was in the order that was corrected that did not really read right when it came to this Table 2, but we made sure to correct that. Almost all commenters also brought up the issue of the selenium limits that are in the use agreement and requested that the order should require load limit reductions that are consistent with the use agreement. And to address this comment, staff revised the order to require compliance with selenium load reduction strategy that's in the use agreement. And that selenium load reduction strategy includes both the load numbers, so gliding down to background concentrations, which is what the use agreement requires by assuming zero discharge at the end of 2019, and also a structure of incentives and fees that the use agreement contains. Of course, order requires compliance with the basin plans. So, many commenters also brought up the salt load limits and asked that either the salt load limits from the basin plan or from the use agreement be included in the order. And really, salt loads are incorporated into the order by reference because the order requires compliance with the basin plan's salt and boron control program. And normally, we would put salt load limits into an order. However, the basin plan does also contain an alternative way of compliance with the salt and boron control program, which is through participation in the real-time management program. And the board, of course, approved the real-time management program in December of last year, and the dischargers are participating. In fact, the Bureau of Reclamation signed the management agency agreement to actively support this effort, and even if needed, to provide dilution flows to meet the objective at Vernalis. So there has really been no change in the requirements of the order. However, we did add some discussion in the information sheet to explain a little bit more about the RTMP and how it works. Some commenters asked that the order should prohibit discharge, any discharge after 2019, or to require new environmental review for any coverage after 2019. And to address this comment, there have been revisions, including the late revisions that you have in front of you. And the change made is really to state that the discharges to San Luis Drain beyond 2019 are not authorized. However, if there should be a proposed continuation of discharge, dischargers must demonstrate to this board's satisfaction that there is compliance with applicable CEQA analysis and Endangered Species Act. And the basin plan, of course, contains this option that discharge is not necessarily prohibited if the water quality objectives continue to be met. Some of the comment letters put forth objections to changes in monitoring sites. And there is a quick reminder here of the monitoring design under the proposed order. And it really focuses on water bodies that are affected by the discharge. So this order monitors the discharge at the terminus of the San Luis Drain and then immediate receiving waters. So I explained why those upstream sites are no longer really a part of the requirement of the order. Related to this is actually an issue of monitoring in wetlands. And we did receive comments that the wetland supply channels should be monitored year-round, not just during storms. And also there were comments recommending that sampling frequency is weekly. Just a reminder that this requirement to monitor wetland channels daily during storms and for a week after storm completion there has been no change. This is the same as in the current waste discharge requirements. However, we are concerned about the wetlands, and those wetlands are in the West Side Coalition's area, so we are requiring the West Side Coalition to pick up monitoring the rest of the year. And we're talking about the requirement that's consistent with the DCRT's recommendation, which has recently revised the frequency to monthly frequency the rest of the year. And just a reminder, really, if it's not a storm event, there is no discharge of the subsurface style drainage from the grassland drainage area into those wetlands. So there is no reason to really include it in this proposed order. To just look a little bit more closely at the wetlands and this issue, because it really is an important issue to us to protect not just the river but the wetlands as well. And there are named sites here at the headworks of the south complex of the managed wetlands. And this chart to the left shows water quality results during past time, and the chart on top shows water quality results from the two sites at the entry of the north complex. And these are selenium concentrations shown here compared to, my legend got lost, but the red line here is 2 micrograms per liter selenium, which is the water quality objective that applies to wetland channels and wetlands. And this vertical line here is the last diversion from the grassland drainage area into those wetlands, which was in February of 2005. So daily storm monitoring is required. However, there has been no diversion since 2005. Looking at the selenium concentrations, we see that they vary, and there are excursions above the water quality objective of two at one of the sites in the north and some sites in the south. And one thing to kind of just bring to your attention is that there are 4 possible contributions to the water that is the wetland water supply. And one is the fresh water from the main canal, which is provided to the managed wetlands. In this area to the north, there could be some discharges from the adjacent lands. There could be some commingled discharge during storms from the grassland drainage area. And when the conditions are of low flow or no flow, the groundwater can seep into those wetland supply channels. So really seeing these excursions above the water quality objective of 2, even in the absence of any subsurface discharges into the wetland channels, is not so much a surprise if we consider that it's possible that the shallow groundwater could be seeping into those channels. And on the next slide, we can look at just an outline of those 2 wetland areas. And these are the data borrowed from the West Side Coalition's 2015 Groundwater Quality Assessment Report. And this first map shows soil drainage in those wetlands, and the more intensely red, the less drainage there is in these soils. So looking at the wetlands, there is quite a bit of poorly drained to very poorly drained soil in this area. And then looking at the depth of groundwater, it's pretty shallow below much of this area, and this area then has potential to evapoconcentrate, which means that that groundwater is so shallow, it seeps into canals, and it can increase concentration of selenium when the water is evaporating. We believe that the coalition's effort of monitoring those wetland channels will be sufficient to identify if management plans are needed to address any contributions from agricultural lands that could be reaching potentially those wetland supply channels. Commenters have asked about the issue of sediment disposal and requested that the issue is resolved regarding the sediment that's in the San Luis drain that can become enriched in selenium with that discharge traveling through San Luis drain. And the order requires sediment monitoring in the San Luis drain, and there are discharge limits that apply to the sediment just as they do apply to the water. And there are other requirements in the order with respect to operation of the San Luis drain, such that there is no mobilization of sediment. And the order also requires that any sediment is removed before concentrations of various constituents, including selenium, would reach hazardous levels. However, this kind of dredging, removal, and disposal process would be handled through a different permitting process, but it's not a part of this proposed order. We received a couple of comments regarding the appropriateness of the water quality objectives that apply to mud slough, and a request was to revise them to meet the water quality objectives that apply to wetland channels and salt slough, which is 2 micrograms of selenium per liter. The revision of water quality objectives would have to be handled through a basin plan, and it's beyond of the scope of the order to revise to amend the basin plan. The order implements the basin plan, and the current objective for that yellow stretch of mud slough and the reach of the San Joaquin River is 5, which will become effective. It will have to be met by the end of 2019. And both carrying from the last year's workshop and from comments received, there has been concern about mitigation measures that are associated with the Grassland Bypass project, and as that stretch of mud slough and the San Joaquin River there in yellow got that additional time in the basin plan amendment to meet that water quality objective of 5, there are required mitigation measures for that, and commenters asked that the order should require implementation of mitigation measures. And To address this issue, we added a requirement that the discharger has to annually report to us on the implementation of mitigation measures. And the order itself requires implementation of all mitigation measures that are within the board's authority. And the board, upon finding that any implementation of mitigation measures is not timely or adequate, could impose immediate prohibition of discharge. Regarding the habitat mitigation associated with that extension of compliance with the objective of 5 for selenium, this is just a really quick overview of what has been done so far. This map really zooms in on that yellow stretch of mud slough and the San Joaquin River. And in blue here is actually the north complex of the wetlands. You see a snippet of it, but the dark green shows the San Luis National Wildlife Refuge, a federal refuge that has one set of mitigation measures in it in the Schwab unit, and it's 31 acres of year-round wetland habitat, and the discharger has been working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to really do some improvement work in the unit, but they also pay for the water deliveries of the agreed amount, which is 480 acre-feet per year. And then for the state refuge, which is up here, it is near the mud slough, that reach that still is not required to meet 5. So the habitat mitigation for that footprint of the mud slough is about 95 acres of the year-round wetlands, and the discharger has been paying for water deliveries in agreed amounts for that unit. So that's kind of like the summary of the mitigation effort for that. Finally, you should have a set of late revisions in front of you. Really, the biggest change is the language for what happens after 2019, and I addressed that in the comments received and the revisions of the order. And there are then some clarifications in the information sheet and a response to an additionally identified comment. But to sum up, this order would update requirements and time schedule for compliance for the Grassland Bypass project. And the order provides a balance between the need to evaluate compliance and maybe having a more comprehensive suite of data to answer some other questions. And the order meets requirements in the basin plan and other applicable board policies. Staff recommends adoption of the proposed order with the late revisions. And at this time, I would like to submit the presentation, the agenda package, and the associated files into the record. This concludes the presentation, and staff are available to answer any questions.
Elaine, I want to comment, simply say that it was a very comprehensive presentation. Appreciate that greatly. Any questions, members of the board?
I had one question. First, a comment. Carl said that there was a comprehensive presentation, but I thought it was a well put together presentation. I thought it told the story, and just wanted to say well done, that it was easy to follow and understandable, and connected some of the dots that I had. The only question that I had, I want to certainly hear from everybody, but on slide 24, you said the prohibition of discharge could be implemented if not timely and adequate. You said the board. I didn't know if that was, it had to come back to the board, or if that's something that's delegated to Pamela.
I believe staff review annual reports, and if the staff would make a recommendation to the management that something needs attention, then that process would be worked out.
Is that right? And the only reason, it's just the way it was worded sounded like a pretty dramatic action by
I'm
the
sorry,
board.
you'll
and
have
so-
to, I was talking to Adam, so I didn't hear all your question. I
On
apologize.
slide 24, if you want to go there. The last slide, prohibition of discharge. If some of the actions and mitigation measures weren't taken, the way it was presented is the board could stop discharge at any time if and I was just wondering what level of review that was.
Staff can't impose the prohibition of discharge.
The text in the permit is specific that the board would have to, it says, basically, upon determination by the board that timely and adequate mitigation is not completed. So it would have to be, I think, a board action.
That's a capital B board. Okay.
To be honest, the board delegates a lot of its authority to the executive officer. I think in this case, the executive officer could likely exercise delegated authority to impose that prohibition. The question, as stated, is fairly dramatic to take that course of action. I would imagine, and the board could certainly provide direction, that if that type of action would be taken, we would bring this back in front of the board rather than have the executive officer exercise her delegated authority to execute that type of prohibition.
Thank you for that clarification. Any further questions or comments?
Just on an aside, on the dilution flows of the Merced River that was mentioned, I'm kind of thinking, how is that affected by the drought or climate change issues and expected dilution flows that may not or may not be happening?
That's a very good question, and in general, the drought cuts both ways, the discharge and the dilution flows. So right now, the San Luis drain is completely dry, so I'm not sure what the status is of the Merced River flows, but I think that the selenium has been, the concentrations have been below the objective.
And the other question is, maybe for council, is just, I didn't have straight in my mind, what is the report that we decided we're not submitting to the record, and who put that in?
That was a late comment that we received on the 19th, or not the 19th, let me just get my notes here, it was the 29th.
Yeah.
The report was a July 2015 report, and it really it spoke to, or was titled the reduction of drainage impaired lands and the costs of reducing drainage impaired lands as a practice, basically to reduce the selenium loads. So it was a report on the economics of fallowing lands, essentially. We haven't had a chance from the staff perspective to fully review the report, so we had asked it.
Can I ask who submitted that?
Yes, it was submitted by Environmental Coalition. There's, I think, 15 environmental groups that submitted a letter as a coalition. I can read those to you if you'd like.
That's okay. I got most of those people here.
I think the lead commenter is the California Water Impact Network, and they represent the coalition of various other groups.
I mean, that sounds like a fairly significant report that was, I'm sure, prepared in response to some of this particular project. I certainly understand the timeliness issue. I am feeling a little at a loss not having that information, but I understand the ruling. So, thank you.
That gets back to my frustration, Bob. When people get reports in late and staff doesn't have the opportunity and can't be prepared at the meeting to really comment on the information, it creates a real burden and really points to the necessity. And not just this item, it happens, and you've had the same experience in the past as chair. If things come in late, there's a balancing act that you try to do, and it's a difficult one.
Yeah, and I recognize that, and I understand your decision on this item, but you know, when a lot of organizations, particularly nonprofit organizations, are trying to prepare these reports, I mean, often we have things in our staff that they can't get done in time, things get delayed, and this report probably, you know, they could shoot for having a timely submittal and something happens, it doesn't get done, and it's outside their control. But, you know, we still have to make our decisions. I just want to recognize that, you know, it's not necessarily, it could be out, I mean, yeah, it's a late submittal, but that may be out of the control of the group that's submitting the information. So I think we all share that frustration. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Very good then. We'll go on to testimony by the Grasslands Bypass Use Agreement Panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Joe McGann. I'm with Summers Engineering, and I'm drainage coordinator for the Grassland Drainers. We've assembled this panel for you to take our 20 minutes, try to fit it all in the 20 minutes that you've allocated. On the panel, we have Dennis Falasky, who's the manager of Panoche Drainage District, Rick Ortega, who is manager of Grassland Water District, Gary Bobker, who's with the Bay Institute, Richard Denton, who represents Contra Costa County, and Lucinda Shee, who represents Contra Costa Water District. So these represent some of the members who have been working for years, stakeholders developing the use agreement for the Grassland Bypass project, so certainly have a vested interest on these orders and what we're doing here. I have just a few slides that I'd like to go through. Yelena did a great job, as you mentioned, of summarizing the project, so no need to try to repeat any of that. So I'll try to be quick and efficient in going through some of the information I have. Just quickly, the use agreement process was mentioned, but it was a stakeholder-developed process through various state and federal agencies, and then also the stakeholders that we have here today, Contra Costa County, the Contra Costa Water District, the Bay Institute, also other environmental groups were part of the stakeholder process. This latest use agreement was developed over a 24-month period. So a lot of discussion went on with that, many meetings and conferences and development. One of the goals of the current use agreement was allow time to develop the final elements of our drainage program, and those elements are very complex, complicated, that have gone into meeting the load requirements and the reductions of selenium, and will be needed forthcoming to comply with the use agreement and these new orders. But we certainly would like to say that our past performance, we feel, has fostered trust in the process. Our success is well documented, and so we think it's a very good program. I think if anything I could show you, this is the most important thing I want to show you today. Basically, the goal of the use agreement and the requirements and the waste discharge requirements is that by 2019, our discharge to the San Joaquin River is terminated. This is a picture of the San Luis Drain, basically a picture of our discharge today. Today there is no discharge. There hasn't been any discharge since April, and likely there won't be any discharge through a good portion of the remainder of the year. So this is a very, through the things that have been implemented locally by the farmers within the area and Panoche and other folks in our reuse area, why we've been successful in reducing the loads, and in effect now they're at zero. Just quickly, Yelena mentioned some of these benefits, but because of the bypass project, drainage have been removed from 97 miles of wetland canals. There have been improvements to water quality in the San Joaquin River. One of our goals as representing farmers is it allows continued farming of a very productive, highly productive agricultural area within the Grassland area. Mention that now with the bypass project, we have these reductions of a volume of 82%, load 95%, selenium load, salt load has been reduced by 77%, and the refuges today receive clean water through their delivery channels. In conclusion of my little slides here, the bypass project has been very successful. The farmers have a long history of implementing and projects to reduce drainage both regionally and on farm, and improve water quality, and to maintain viable agriculture. stakeholder group has developed the use agreement. Kind of why this group is before you today has been a the use agreement has been a useful complement to the waste discharge requirements, and these new waste discharge requirements should be drafted to be consistent with current and future direction of this regionally based program, and we think they are. So that concludes my presentation. I have some other slides, but I don't need to show them. I think the next, I was going to have Rick Ortega here. Yes, sure, go ahead. I think I can.
Yeah, again, my name is Dennis Falaski, and I'm the general manager of Panoche Water District and the Grassland Basin Drainers. There's been a comment that the drain is probably dry because of the drought, and although the drought, we all know, has been devastating, the Grassland Basin Drainers has very little fallow land this year. We have a very good water supply. Part of that is water right holders, exchange contractors, and the other half of that is made up of districts that have long-term contracts for supplemental water, and we've been able to farm about 90% plus of the Grassland Basin area. If we did not have our drainage plan in place now that we have currently with our reuse area and other effective things we're doing, you would see about 24 to 28,000 acre feet of water that would be flowing through that drain. So this is a result of the management that the stakeholders have put in and the money they've spent.
Hello, Rick Ortega, General Manager, Grassland Water District and the Resource Conservation District. Thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity. So Grassland Water District delivers water supplies to the state, federal, and private lands within the ecological area, what we call the Grassland Ecological Area. It's largest wetland, contiguous wetland in the western United States, collectively about the size of New York City, about 300 square miles, 200,000 acres. We host millions of waterfowl and shorebirds annually, amongst and the array of listed species as well. By virtue of our elevation and our inherent hydrogeology, the reality is that we need a program and an entity, a responsible entity, to manage surface water and subsurface flows. So if we reference some of the slides that you've seen, we sit just below. We're the lowest land in that landscape, and so the bypass project has been critical in the management of those flows and providing relief, drainage relief of those subsurface flows as well, because those do impound into our conveyance either directly via surface flows or indirectly via infiltration of that perched water table. For these reasons, the Grassland Water District strongly supports the approval of the new Grassland Bypass Project, WDR, to Reclamation, the authority, and to the area drainers. Throughout the implementation of the project, the area drainers have successfully managed surface and subsurface flows, circumventing the wetland complex and providing drainage relief of the hypersaline perched water table that would otherwise infiltrate our critical wetlands. This program, for these reasons, is critical to maintaining wetland productivity by way of maintaining healthy soil conditions and water quality delivered to the private, state, and federal refuges. Without this program, these surface flows would impound on subsurface flows would impound on the main canal and into our conveyance. That's a reality. Even removing the irrigation aspects of it, the reality is that perch table is there and it is flowing towards us. So it's very concerning to my 2,200 landowners, the state and federal refuges, my boards of directors, that we see this program continue, not only in the few years to come, but also beyond 2019. I emphasize these points because that's the reality is we're in the business of growing food for ducks, essentially, creating seed and biomass and meeting the metabolic requirements of the Pacific Flyway. And this really, outside of the rice and the Sac Valley, is the last remaining wetlands in California. So a critical area. And with that, any questions?
Questions? No, thank you. We will proceed with the next speaker, and we'll come back and ask questions of the whole panel when we finish, unless some board member has a question as we go along.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice to see you again, members of the board and staff. I'm Gary Bopker, Program Director at the Bay Institute. I have taken the oath. The Grasslands Bypass Use Agreement has been a pretty big success. It's been disappointing that it's taken longer than we originally contemplated, but we set out with the intention of eliminating, virtually eliminating the planned anthropogenic discharges of selenium loads to the San Joaquin River. And we're just about there. And the grassland discharges really deserve a lot of credit for embracing that as a goal and for taking many actions to achieve that objective. I also want to thank the staff for being very responsive. Certainly they heard a lot back from many of us about our concerns about the original language in the draft order, and they've taken our arm waving and turned it into very good revisions to the order. I'd like to address sort of three issues that still are outstanding for me. The first is this agreement is intended after 2020 to not allow, we're not going to have discharges from agricultural operations after 2020. So I would suggest that the order actually say, where it references discharges to the San Luis Drain beyond 31 December 2019 for the purposes of managing stormwater discharges, et cetera, to reflect that the only contemplated use of the San Luis Drain beyond that point is for stormwater discharges. Second, I think it's a very good addition to require an annual report. Staff described what would be involved in the annual report. I would actually request that you also schedule an annual update so that the implementers of the agreement, the Bureau and the dischargers report to you on the status of implementation, and the public has a chance to comment. And that way, issues that have been raised by various parties about their concerns with monitoring or mitigation, et cetera, and I'm not going to get into the substance of that, but whatever those concerns are then can be presented to you, there can be a discussion of it, and you can take appropriate action or not. But I think that would be make this whole process a little bit more accessible and allow concerns to be raised after each year's operation, so we can learn from what's happening. The third point I want to make is in regards to the revision of the basin plan objective for mud slough itself. I agree that the recommendations that my organization made and others are not really relevant to the waste discharge requirement itself. Nonetheless, we've deferred compliance with the 5 milligram per liter objective for many years. There's certainly a great deal of evidence that the 5 parts per billion objective is not fully protective of aquatic life. And we are devoting many resources in the state of California to improving and restoring environmental conditions in the San Joaquin River and the tributaries to the San Joaquin River. And that all seems to argue for taking a hard look at that objective and seeing whether it's adequate. So within the context of how we got here and deferring meeting the 5 part per billion objective, I think it's important for the board to start to wrestle with when it's time to look at the basin plan requirements and to consider whether they need to be strengthened. And with that, thanks for your time.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Richard Denton. I'm a consultant to Contra Costa County. Ryan Hernandez, who's the manager of the Contra Costa County Water Agency, is also here in the audience today, and I have taken the oath. I'd also like to thank Helena for the amazing presentation. Covered a lot of, I think I actually learned something as well. And also I just want to give you a Delta urban user's perspective. Gary's talked about the effects of selenium on fish and wildlife. We also have those concerns that
a lot of the residents in Contra Costa County and others in the Delta are interested in fishing and other recreation. So it's a concern there. But our specific concern is salinity in the Delta. And so that's why in the 2001 use agreement we added salinity or salt loads as part of the requirement. And our interest there was just that the idea that the selenium would reduce and the actions to take reduce the selenium loads would reduce the salt loads, but we weren't sure or confident enough that they would work completely correlated and that they would reduce at the same rate. And in fact, that has been how it's turned out, that it looks as though the selenium rates have actually, all the loads have decreased, selenium and salt, but selenium has increased faster than for salt. So it is important, I think, to regulate salt and even boron independently of selenium and not just assume actions to reduce selenium are going to also reduce salt. Your staff have done an excellent job and have addressed our concerns about discharges after 2019. I'll just echo Gary's point that the intent is that it'll only be for stormwater, so the sequel would be for stormwater discharges. And also just to note that any use of the drain past 2019 will also require a new use agreement. That wasn't mentioned in there. But and then the cleanup of mud slough after 2019, we all thought that this project was a great one. The idea was to clean up salt slough and parts of the San Joaquin, and that has been so successful it's off the 303D list, and it'd be nice if we could also get mud slough to that point. And so we respectfully ask that you do request your staff in the next revisions of the current basin plan to address some of these things, like a selenium target of 2 parts per billion. And there was another obsolete aspect of the waste discharge requirement, which I think was touched upon briefly, but there is something in there about an annual selenium load maximum of 8,000 pounds of selenium, and that's been in there forever. And now these guys are reducing way below that, so that is an obsolete maximum load. And if you want to have a maximum load in there, it should come down a lot more than 8,000. So just to sum up, I'd like to thank your staff again, like Gary, for being so responsive to our written comments and making these late revisions that have addressed our concerns. And we do look forward to working with Reclamation and the discharges to develop a new use agreement to deal with stormwater drainage in the future. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you, board and staff. My name is Lucinda Shi. Sure, you're as tall as I am. I guess so, sorry. Well, he is louder than I am. I'm here basically to echo my name is Lucinda Shi. I'm with the Contra Costa Water District. I did take the oath. And I'm here to basically echo what Gary and Richard just said before me. Really appreciate the work that the staff has done to be responsive to our comments, and then also what the drainers have done to eliminate or working towards eliminating both salt and selenium loads to the Delta. Just a little bit of background. More specifically, Richard talked about the Delta, the county urban interests. Contra Costa Water District, as you may know, we serve about 500,000 people in eastern and central Contra Costa County. When we rely exclusively on the Delta for our water supply for the people and the industry there. We operate our own diversion facilities, and we have made, in the past 20 years, substantial investments to protect our water quality, our source water quality in the Delta. And salinity is one of our big issues, one of our main concerns, located as we are in the Delta. And as such, we were involved from the beginning in the Grasslands Bypass use agreement process. I agree that with everybody else that it has been very successful. We'd like to see it continue. We appreciate the efforts, again, of the farmers to eliminate both selenium and salt from the discharge, and we look forward to continuing to work through the process the future use agreements for stormwater drainage to maintain working towards the goal of zero discharge of especially salt to the delta. And look, we still got a minute and a half left.
Very good, and thank you for interesting presentation. I have some questions, but before I ask my questions, are there any comments or questions by members of the board? I'll proceed then. We've heard from Gary about the use of the San Luis Drain Pass 2019B for stormwater discharges. And the question is, should that be noted in this use agreement or in some other document?
I think our order, as Helena described, our basin plan doesn't prohibit a discharge so long as it meets the objectives of the basin plan. What they're saying is that they want this order to be clear that it's just for future, anything beyond that, it would be for just stormwater, and provided all the appropriate CEQA and other legal requirements are done in order to allow that discharge to occur. So there would be, if the board agreed with that, we would have to make a revision to the order to read that way.
Right, and as we go through the basin plan amendments that will be seen when, the end of next year, on salt, when are we going to be seeing out of CV salts that effort? When will we be seeing the basin plan amendments?
Basin plan, you will be seeing a salt and nitrate management plan.
Okay.
And the basin plan amendment is a couple of years out. The reference they're making to salt and boron is associated with the Vernalis basin plan and TMDL. And that piece of puzzle, there were some comments wanting those loadings to be included in this order, but that TMDL provided an alternative to having those prescribed in waste discharge requirements.
Right.
They were allowed to use this management agreement that we have with the Bureau to implement real-time management. So that's where that control measure is for salts and borons from this area.
But Gary Bopker made this comment that the 5 parts per billion water quality
Oh, that's
objective-
for selenium.
I know, I understand
Yeah.
that. And is that going to be addressed in the basin plan? Any
Through
basin
CV
plan
salts?
amendments that we?
Through CV salts? No, that has not been part of the scope for CV salts.
And let me clarify a couple of the comments. First of all, this order acknowledges, even stepping back one more, most of the irrigated lands orders that have come before the board, in fact, all of them that have currently been issued, rely on the irrigated lands programmatic EIR, which analyzed a suite of management practices that are done at farms throughout the Central Valley. Monstrous undertaking to put together that EIR, and that's what allows us to go through the process of issuing all the general waste discharge requirements to the individual coalitions and to individual growers without conducting a separate CEQA analysis for each one of those projects. This project, on the other hand, is the one outlier. It rests on a combination CEQA and NEPA document that was generated in conjunction with the use agreement that has specific requirements that apply to the use of this drain. And in issuing these waste discharge requirements, we rely on that CEQA document, not on our programmatic EIR. So it's exactly correct. This order here doesn't authorize discharges beyond 2019. If we want to use, if it's appropriate to use this drain after 2019 to convey stormwater discharges that may have selenium and salts in them, we would have to conduct a separate CEQA analysis or fit it within the irrigated lands regulatory program if that's appropriate. I think to reauthorize that use agreement, you would also have to conduct a separate CEQA NEPA document, in which case any revisions to these WDRs to authorize discharges beyond 2019 would likely rely on that later CEQA document. So frankly, it's one of those things there where we don't want to prejudge what's going to happen after 2019. All we're clear here is that the CEQA NEPA document for the use agreement has analyzed all the significant effects that will happen through 2019 and this permit doesn't authorize discharges beyond 2019.
Exactly. So after 2019, what is the water quality objective for selenium and mud slough?
The water quality objective is 5 micrograms per liter, if I'm correct, and there's some discussion of an even lower objective that would have to go through a basin planning process. That isn't on the work plan to revise that downward, though staff are looking at the scientific literature that could support such an amendment. That is not encompassed in this. Since discharges under the use agreement wouldn't go forward after 2019, we don't authorize them here. The basin plan would authorize discharges as long as they meet that 5 microgram per liter limit.
And Mr. Denton referred to cleanup of mud slough. Any thoughts or discussion on that?
I think that the cleanup of mud slough refers to, at least as far as this board is concerned, refers to taking mud slough off of a 303D list and making sure that there are no water quality impairments. Certainly if the selenium limit goes down by any basin planning action, we would have to look at whether that stretch of mud slough complies with any revised selenium limit.
So what we're talking about would be if there were changes to be made, we'd have to go through an exercise, CEQA exercise focused on 2020 and later. Is that correct?
If things are going to happen in that drain involving drainage discharges, we are going to have to figure out whether those activities would be covered under the Irrigated Lands Programmatic EIR or whether a separate CEQA NEPA document would need to be generated. If there's a use agreement, there's going to be another CEQA NEPA document generated, and in all likelihood, we'd work with the other agencies to make sure that that covered all the significant effects that would otherwise need to be covered in a board CEQA document.
I guess as one board member, I would like to begin to hear what tentative plans there may be for the future for past 2020, which obviously if we're doing that exercise would probably have to occur before 2020.
I think
I'm confused. So if you're referring to the objective, a review of the appropriateness of the objective or the review of this order?
Well, if in fact we plan to take it off the 303D list.
So right now the current
the
objective.
the whole 9 yards of what we're talking about.
So the current objective by the basin plan for mud
Right.
slough is 5. In the San Joaquin River is 5. In the wetlands, it's 2. So what you're hearing from Gary and others is that we should have it be 2 everywhere.
Well, I'm not
and
saying
so that's
that,
different than
but it would
this action.
we're going to have to go through a process at a point in time, and I would like to. And what we come up with, the numbers, I can't prejudge that. I don't think anybody can, but we need to go through that process, and I want to learn when that process might be starting and what it might consist of.
For a basin plan for a new objective or for continuing discharges to the San Luis drain? There are 2 different things.
Well, it may well be. What does staff plan to do?
I think the 2 things are going on. One and I think that's what Pamela's saying too. One is the use agreement. And the use agreement that we have in front of us says this ends in 2019. As soon as we hear from the agencies, and I think there are murmurings that perhaps stormwater flows might be conveyed, as soon as we hear that agreement, that there might be another use agreement, we're going to be fully engaged in that process. That is what we are doing with respect to WDRs. With respect to the basin plan, any movement with that 5 to 2 microgram requirement, that's something that is addressed through the triennial review process, through our work plans and how we address, prioritize basin plan amendments. But surely we've got staff that is ingesting the scientific literature, is hearing what it takes to protect beneficial uses in all the waterways that we have jurisdiction over.
Dr. Longley, can I just clarify one one thing.
Certainly.
On the discussion of the drain and the use of the drain after 2019, the order really requires that if they intend to use the drain at all after 2019, it kicks us into this CEQA. There has to be CEQA done and NEPA done. The other important thing is to address some of these concerns and comments. We included some monitoring in the order that requires them to report annually on that progress made, because we want to keep tabs on what's going on out there and what they are planning to do, and that's how we intend to watch that.
Very good. Yeah, and I think this board has been very good at staying on top of this issue. But, you know, in this day and age, 5 years, 4.5 years isn't very far off. And studies may have to be done, things of that nature, and that's genesis of my questions.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, the use agreement requires us to embark on a process to deal with stormwater, and we have already started that.
Good.
So, you know, we know what needs to be done. We know there needs to be CEQA NEPA. We know there needs to be another use agreement. And so we're planning to do that. And you know, that's kind of a bigger issue. The stormwater is huge and can't be regulated by, you know, a farmer putting in drip irrigation. It's bigger than that. So we're embarking on that process.
Very good, and you know, we'd like to have a lot of stormwater to deal with too.
Yeah.
But you know, it's a two-edged sword. Any questions, comments by members of the board? Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony. Take testimony now by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We need a 5-minute break here, so we will take 5 minutes recess. Hey, guys. I don't know what happened to Bob.
I know, I wish you had that power. I'm sad you don't have that power. What? I told him I'm sad he doesn't have that power. Oh, yeah.
Could somebody check and see where Mr. Snyder is? See. Okay, we're ready for testimony from United Fish and Wildlife.
Good afternoon, Chairman Longley and members of the board. My name is Joy Winkle. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Sacramento Fish and Wildlife Office, Endangered Species Division. And I've worked on ag drainage since 1987 and worked on the ESA consultations for the Grassland Bypass Project use agreement in 2001 and 2009. The Fish and Wildlife Service, my office, submitted email comments on June 22nd within the public comment period with the note at the end that we would be providing detailed comments or supporting information for our comments in writing. And so our detailed comment letter, which really didn't transmit any additional comments, it was just supporting information, was sent out on June 25th. And we were notified by board staff that our email comments were accepted into the record, but that our written comments were not. And I understand the dilemma of submitting late comments. I totally appreciate that. But at the same time, there are things in our written comments. There are figures and scatter plots of water quality, weekly water quality data, and URLs that document our previous comment letters. We commented on the Basin Plan Amendment and scoping comments, NEPA comments. All of that is supplied in our written comments, so we would just ask for you as the board to consider accepting our written comments as part of the official record for this action. We also want to acknowledge that your board staff, both Sue McConnell and Helena, were very receptive and spent a lot of time talking with us and trying to address our comments and concerns, and we really appreciate their involvement and really appreciate the complexity of this issue. I mean, I've had the liberty of working on it for so long that it's kind of second nature, but for people to come in new and try to get a grasp of it, I'm very impressed at the presentation that was given to the board today. We would like to emphasize the importance of suitable water quality for wetlands, for refuges, both for refuge operations needs and for implications to endangered species. We also want to note that water quality in the grassland wetland channels has been monitored on a weekly basis for the past 20 years. And after talking to Sue McConnell, it's kind of a nuanced thing. It's something that was included as part of the monitoring plan through the Grassland Bypass Project, DCRT. It wasn't something that was necessarily included in the waste discharge requirements for this project. And it's kind of a splitting hairs thing in that the drainage that's now appearing in the wetland channels isn't really from the grassland drainage area. But as the regional board staff reports from the early 2000s by Chilcott and Eppinger and Chilcott pointed out, there are agricultural discharges from ag lands adjacent and north to the grassland drainage area that still discharge into the wetland channels or into drains, almond drain, pozo drain, that go into the wetland channels, and also groundwater accretions that get into the wetland channels and have resulted in continued periodic elevations of selenium in some locations. And so the data that we submitted in our written comment letters showed like scatter plots of weekly water quality monitoring data for the sites in the South Grasslands. Of note, there was exceedance in 2009 in Agatha Canal, which is one of the wetland supply channels, of 25 parts per billion, and another one in 2012 in Camp 13 ditch of 50 parts per billion, and both of those were associated with low flow conditions in the channels, so that the source of the water probably was either groundwater accretions or ag drainage. But it still could provide habitat to and have a lasting effect in the ecosystem. I mean, a spike of selenium in the water can have longer lasting ramifications as it moves up the food chain. So, you know, we think that supporting information is good documentation to support continued weekly water quality monitoring of those channels, whether it be part of this project or the irrigated lands. That's, you know, not our discretion, that's certainly your discretion. So in conclusion, we just would ask that the regional board consider accepting our written comments as part of the official record for this action. Thank you very much.
But I did hear something else. I don't know if I'm inclined to accept the written comments, but I would presume it's a conclusion there that you were concerned about the frequency of monitoring. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And
We'd like to see the monitoring continue as a weekly sampling, because there's been 20 years of data and there still are exceedances. And I mean, from a operational perspective from the regional board, I mean, there's a monthly mean objective for those wetland channels of 2 parts per billion. And if you're only collecting once a month sampling, that's not really a mean, that's just once a month sampling. So.
it's a significant, I understand your concern. Are there any, yes, Patrick?
Dr. Longley, I think we should get to the issue of the late submitted comments. The board chair, we consulted you about those late comments. Essentially, there was almost a placeholder email sent in by the deadline that raised some issues. It was a very short email. That was followed up a few days later by a written comment letter that detailed some additional concerns or elaborated on those concerns. It's worth noting that, and Yelena and Sue can correct me if I'm wrong, but this order has actually been out for comment in some form or another since May of 2014. So it's really tough for the board to react to comments that come in after the comment deadline. I would also ask perhaps Adam and Sue to comment on the role that I think it's the DCRT played in recommending that the monitoring be reduced, and that this is a conversation that has been ongoing between the regulatory agencies and the dischargers for some time. But again, the first thing, if you want to revisit the conclusion to exclude that late submitted written comment, I would suggest that you do that now.
And irrespective of that, this comment that request for weekly monitoring instead of monthly monitoring is on the record.
That's in the record, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the issue of admitting the submission by Fish and Wildlife into the record, does anyone want to comment on that? I've made a ruling, and certainly that ruling can be reversed if majority of the board feels that way, but seeing no comments,
Let me just say, I mean, for me, the key point here about the frequency of monitoring is on the record, and we're going to have a discussion about that.
That's
Absolutely.
right. And even if we were admitted, I presume that would be the major point made there. So we'll proceed then on to the next presentation by Pacific Coast Federation.
It might be worthwhile to have staff respond to that particular issue. I think they might be able to offer a more detailed explanation about
Before
that.
we go on, okay.
Hey, Dr. Longley. The data collection and review team, that's what the DCRT stands for. That team has been really the lead in figuring out some of these monitoring locations that you're talking about today, these wetlands monitoring locations. It had been weekly, and they had met and changed it to monthly. This order, the grasslands order, we have not reduced that monitoring as part of the grasslands order, so that's just one key aspect here. Now, as far as the weekly versus monthly monitoring, we are in the issue is the grasslands bypass discharge, and the discharge to those wetland channels only occurs during storm events, and really hasn't occurred for a number of years even then. So, this order requires daily monitoring during those storm events and a week thereafter. So that we feel that we've really captured the discharge's effect on those wetland supply channels under this order. However, there is other, as was spoken to by our Fish and Wildlife representative, discharges from the West Side Coalition area to these wetland channels, and we have already met with them and are going to be requiring this monitoring under that coalition's order because of those discharges, in addition to whatever the monthly monitoring of the data collection and review team is doing.
Okay, so you say you're going to be requiring monitoring by them. On what frequency?
We have not figured out what frequency yet. That's something we haven't sat down with them and figured out. The order allows representative monitoring. I would say that that's something that the board, has discretion to give us direction right now. I will say that the monitoring that we do require will be sure to capture, what the discharges effects are on the wetland channels. And it might be that during certain periods of time, there'll be no monitoring because there's no discharges from the agricultural areas.
That's fair.
Go ahead, sorry.
That's fair, but I guess, a little bit of my other life creeps into this. I have to deal with data, and first of all, data costs money. I recognize that data costs money, but on the other hand, you want to make good decisions. You want to have good confidence limits on your data. And, that spike, I can't comment on that spike. That spike was maybe a sampling error. But you need enough data to be able to confirm those kinds of things. And maybe it was real, once again. So I don't like to scrimp on data because you need to be able to put confidence in that data, and it's only with having enough data. Now, that word enough is what's difficult to define.
So, Dr. Longley, that reduction in monitoring wasn't by the board, it was by this other organization that's outside the board that's doing independent monitoring. So what
I'm giving a generic presentation.
I understand, but the Fish and Wildlife Service obviously didn't agree with that decision and wants this board to decide to add its frequency to it. I don't know who serves on that DCRT. Can you expand on that for the board?
Dr. Longley, members of the board, DCRT made this monitoring recommendation back in 2013, and representatives of the Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Regional Board, other agencies reviewed that plan, and there were comments submitted. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, there was a representative, Tom Maurer, who was on the team, and I'm not privy to how the recommendation was made, but I just wanted to let you know that the Fish and Wildlife Service was also a part of that team at that time.
That may be, but my comments stand on their own merit for whatever that is.
Can I speak to that for a second?
Certainly.
So there was a revised monitoring plan that came out of the DCRT. It went out for public comment. My office did submit comments recommending. Basically, it's a little simplified. They did continue monitoring stations J and K, which is Agatha and Camp 13 ditch at the very southern end, on a weekly basis. But they dropped sites L2, M2, saying that would be picked up by, I guess, the coalition or the Grassland Water District and reported on a monthly basis. But we haven't seen any of that data since that happened for L2, M2. And we never got a response back. And as far as I know, the revised monitoring plan hasn't been finalized. I think it's still draft. So I don't know really what the status of that is. Maybe somebody
referring to the West Side monitoring?
No, the DCRT, the
DCRT,
revised
okay,
monitoring
thank you.
plan. Yeah. So.
Adam, can you address that?
Well, I was concerned that she was referring to the West Side's monitoring plan, but it's the DCRT that has not been finalized. I cannot provide any new information on why it has not been finalized. I can say that the monitoring that require the West Side may be more than monthly, maybe weekly or less during periods of discharge. During periods when they're not discharging, it may be reduced substantially from that to make sure that
Well, you've heard this board member's concern, so let's move on. Unless there's comments by members of the board.
I was just going to say, it appears we're going to address this through the West Side Plan, and these questions will be addressed by our staff, who are the experts in this, from our perspective, and that's the appropriate time and place, I think, to have that discussion.
Thank you. This time, take testimony from Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Association.
Good afternoon, Chairman Longley, members of the board. My name is Jamie Volker, and I am here on behalf of the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations. PCFFA is an organization representing hundreds of West Coast fishermen whose livelihoods depend on the continued productivity of the ocean's fisheries, including anadromous fish species like Chinook salmon that rely on a healthy bay delta and San Joaquin River for migration and spawning. Unfortunately, the science is clear that those fish, along with many other aquatic organisms, birds, and other animals, are imperiled by the continued discharge of selenium, salts, and other hazardous pollutants into those waters, including from the Grasslands Bypass Project. This board has the authority to limit those discharges and improve the water quality and environmental conditions in the San Joaquin River, Delta, and Estuary, as the Bureau of Reclamation and San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority themselves agreed to do in their 2009 San Luis Strain Use Agreement. But the proposed waste discharge requirement order at issue here does not go far enough towards reducing those agencies' selenium and salt-laden discharges from the San Luis Drain and their attendant impacts. PCFFA and others detailed the inadequacies and inconsistencies in the proposed order in their written comments to the board, and the board staff has done a good job revising parts of the order in response. However, there remain three major issues that I will address here that undermine the proposed order and its effectiveness in improving the Bay Delta and San Joaquin River ecosystem. First, the selenium discharge limits provided in Section Roman 2, subsection A of the proposed order and specified in Table 2 would allow the same discharge loads as in years past without any yearly reductions designed to put the San Luis Drain dischargers on the, quote, glide path to 2018/2019 very low loads, end quote, and ultimately discharge elimination that the use agreement itself requires in Appendix C. Indeed, the order itself acknowledges that the maximum monthly loads listed in Table 2 are intended to ensure compliance with the water quality objectives on the San Joaquin River at Crow's Landing, not Mud Slough North. The board needs to adopt lower monthly loads specifically intended to meet the water quality objectives in Mud Slough. The revised order does purport to require compliance with the use agreement's load reduction strategy, but that is insufficient. The use agreement is not a regulatory mandate, nor is it intended to meet the Mud Slough North selenium standard. The board should include in the order and commence a basin plan amendment process to formally adopt lower maximum loads for grasslands area ag drainage designed to eliminate discharges from the San Luis Drain by 2019 and achieve the basin plan's selenium objective as soon as possible before then. And at the very least, the board should explicitly reproduce, not merely reference, the agreement's load reduction strategy and limits in the waste discharge requirements. Second, in addition to reducing the TMMLs, the board should also revise the basin plan to lower the prohibition on total annual selenium discharges to the San Joaquin River below the current 8,000-pound limit for the grasslands watershed. As the proposed order recognizes, that limit is set too high to achieve the 5 microgram per liter selenium objective for Mud Slough North by 2019 and is basically ineffective at this point. Third, it is high time that the board reassess whether the 5 microgram per liter selenium standard is protective enough for the Mud Slough and San Joaquin River confluence. The science indicates that it is not. For example, in their 2008 paper entitled The Potential Effects of Selenium Contamination on Federally Listed Species Resulting from Delivery of Federal Water to the San Luis Unit, William Becken and Thomas Moorer explained that even 3.3 micrograms of selenium per liter in the lower San Joaquin River causes approximately 10% mortality in out-migrating juvenile Chinook salmon. 5 micrograms per liter would cause nearly 15% mortality. To better protect these salmon and other animals, the board should lower the selenium standards for the lower San Joaquin River and revise the waste discharge requirements for the Grasslands Bypass Project accordingly. That concludes my comments.
Any questions by board members?
I was gonna,
Go ahead.
just the second question we had about the 8,000 pound limit, and can we get a little explanation on that?
Yeah, let me, and the board may give direction here. He's entirely right that the 8,000 pound limit is high. In this original draft of the order, we've tried to respond to a lot of the environmental and including the Pacific Coast Fishermen's Associations to really calibrate this order to what's actually going on. What's actually going on is the use agreement and reducing those selenium loads per the use agreement, not per the higher limit that's in the basin plan. So this order that's in front of you right now both requires compliance with the basin plan and with the selenium load reductions in the use agreement. Now, it's fairly obvious that the 8,000 pounds is well above of what the use agreement requires. It is the board's option to strike that particular prohibition. I believe it was Roman numeral 1.4 that you were discussing.
Yes, I'll just check that.
I don't think it would significantly affect the enforceability of this order, and frankly, it would eliminate any inconsistencies with the order if we struck that particular provision. With respect to the other comments regarding the...
Patrick, where is that?
That's on page 12 of the order.
And direct me to where that is, please.
It's Roman numeral 1 and 4, which says the discharge of selenium from agricultural subsurface drainage systems in the grassland watershed to the San Joaquin River is prohibited in amounts exceeding 8,000 pounds per year.
I would recommend that we strike that.
So we could strike that, and then the basin plan governs, is that correct?
No, that's actually from the basin plan. So what governs instead, and frankly what is the driver behind compliance, and I'm not finding it right away, but it's a requirement that requires compliance with the use agreement selenium load reductions. And give me just 1 minute.
So should we substitute for 4 something paraphrasing what you just said, or?
It's still in the order, so I wouldn't
Okay.
see the need to duplicate that.
Okay.
The other question here again is raised is the selenium basin plan limits of 5 versus a lower amount.
I absolutely think that's something that should be considered as part of the triennial review. I think
When
it's
is that? We just did it. I think that that we need to have a plan, or I'd like to have brought back to the board an approach that works. I don't want to prioritize here staff's time, but I'd like to have a plan that doesn't wait 3 years for the next triennial.
And
review.
that's
Well,
right in
it'll-
line with what I was asking for earlier.
Yes, and Jeannie Chilcott's over that, who was the original staff person on the selenium objective, so I'm sure she's in the audience and she's heard you clearly. But I guess in terms of the use agreement, it's on page 14 of your order, under provision Roman numeral 3B. I lost it again, sorry, 4. So if you
Okay.
you
Okay.
strike the 8,000, which is high, and it's just putting in a prohibition that's in the basin plan, we can strike it. The use agreement overrides that right now.
And just to clarify, that 8,000, that 8,000 is from the basin plan. There's also other total monthly mean load limits that apply under this order, also from the basin plan, that are much lower. That's also in the limits of the basin plan here for selenium. Those load limits are designed to achieve the objectives in the San Joaquin River at Crow's Landing. So What we have going on here is how are we going to get Mud Slough to achieve that objective of 5? And that's where the use agreement requirement kicks in and ratcheting down the levels. We also have a prohibition that says 2019, there's no more discharge if they can't achieve that objective of 5 also. So the 8,000, there would be no effect to the order whatsoever. And just to add too, they are currently achieving the objective at Crow's Landing, so they are in compliance with these loads, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
You sure?
One of
Thank you.
the tools for revisiting this is sometimes just putting something in the executive officer's report, and then if we want to take further action
You want to
beyond
get a little
that.
closer to your mic.
Oh, and that way we can communicate without bringing it to the board, and then the board can decide to, based on that, if they want, or else we can have an information item or something. But whatever works best and easiest for staff to sort of give a preliminary answer to some of this question about how to proceed on the selenium in particular.
I would certainly recommend that anybody interested in this plug in to the triennial review process. The triennial review process is the board's opportunity to prioritize basin planning efforts based on the need to protect beneficial uses. And that type of it is appropriate to keep this in the discussion, but recognizing that the triennial review process prioritizes a host of problems. If this is elevated, it could bump something else off that the board has already determined is a priority issue. So frankly, the best format to get those arguments across is in the triennial review process, and that's public. Also, if we do any basin plan amendment, it's worth noting that any number that we pick and incorporate into the basin plan will be a peer-reviewed or based on peer-reviewed literature number. So if the scientific consensus is evolving on that, that's something that's worthwhile considering as part of that type of process.
So what I understand from what you're saying is there's a process here that we must adhere to, that there is resource issues too, what stays on the triennial review and what's off based on resources. And did I miss something?
I think that's correct.
Okay.
PCFFA would just suggest that this is an incredibly important issue, and
Well,
we don't think it can wait 3 years.
You know, probably, I guess my answer to that is I'm a little bit frustrated. There is a process that must be followed. There is a resource issue also. And you don't go through these processes overnight. It was pointed out earlier that we've been in this process for a long time. We're in a lot of different processes for a long time, simply because that's what it takes to get to the end objective to protect water quality. And short of that, I have nothing more to add to that. I think what you did do is, you know, we did make a change to the order, and I think both your testimony, but earlier testimony in particular, has highlighted the need to relook the 5 microgram per liter requirement as a water quality objective. I think you've achieved your mission in that respect, maybe not time-wise, but certainly things do happen, but they take a little bit longer.
I appreciate that. I would also like to say that our goal wasn't just to strike the 8,000 pound limit from this order, it was to get that limit reduced, and that should be considered in the basin plan amendment process.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? If not, then I'll go to interested additional cards that I have. Diane Rathman. Thank you. And I have a card for the infamous David Corey.
Chairman Longley, members of the board, David Corey, representing Jess Jordan's ranches today. I couldn't quite decide who to represent.
Yeah, I noticed that. I was looking
Yeah,
just at who was here.
there was a long list that I was going to put on there.
I had to look up to see who it was.
Yeah. My family's farmed, and you hear from me on various water quality issues, but this one's sort of near and dear to my heart. My family's farmed in the drainage area for 70 years. We farm there today, and my son hopes to farm there, 40, 50 years from now, and that's what we're trying to accomplish here with the Grassland Bypass Project. We want to have sustainable agriculture out there. And I've been, intimately involved in negotiations of the use agreement and dealing with various environmental interests to craft that agreement. And I mean, if you have questions about how these things fit together, I'd certainly open to answer any questions that you have. But I do want to point out that the use agreement is a very complex and intricate agreement that has a lot of different provisions that work together to give the drainers the incentive to go to zero discharge as soon as possible. We have load limits in there, so we have specific load limits, but we also have incentive fees that are tied with those. But there's also some provisions in there that excuse some discharges. There's a high rainfall exemption, there's an upper watershed exemption. There's also an ability in the use agreement that allows, if we go below our load limits by a certain amount, we can get credit. And if we have problems where we have a big rain event and we go over our loads, we could actually use those credits toward those exceedances where we really can't control those. Because we understood in the use agreement that there are natural occurrences that go out here that we really have no control over. What we can do as the growers is control those things we can control, but there's outside forces. And so when you look at the drain, right now under the use agreement, under the WDRs, we could be discharging water. But we've gone to zero discharge because we can, and there's a couple reasons for that. One, I think it gains credibility. That's one of the things we've tried to do with the board, with the environmental community, with the entire public, that we're trying to do the best we can. But it also, there is another sort of component of the use agreement that gives us I guess, a self-interest in doing that, because it does store up some credits that if we have an unforeseen event where we have a big rainfall event and we go over a monthly load allocation, we don't face the incentive fees that are in the use agreement. Now, there are termination provisions in the use agreement that kick in, and if we go over a certain amount in the termination loads, there's basically effectively, in your terminology, a prohibition of discharge. So it's a very nuanced agreement that was worked out over many months, and I think it's very well crafted. I'm very proud of that agreement and really intend to live up to it. I have, it's difficult for you to incorporate all the provisions of the use agreement into a WDRs because your framework doesn't allow the kind of flexibility that we have in that. These were negotiated numbers to get us to zero, and we have all those provisions fit together. And I think what staff did, which was requiring us to comply with the selenium load provisions, reduction strategy in the use agreement, is a good way of tying those two together. So I
Thank you.
appreciate your thoughts.
Any questions from Mr. Corey? Thank you very much.
Well, that's no fun. No questions at all? Oh, come on. All right, thanks.
Very good. We're ready now for closing statements by the use agreement panel. Do you have any closing statements based upon what you've heard since you gave your presentation? I see none. Gary, okay.
How could I resist? I think that Bob's comment about trying to capture this and memorialize this in the appropriate way, and by this I mean not the use agreement order itself, but the larger concerns. They're important, serious concerns, and trying to review, in my experience, especially with the State Water Board and Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, is more appropriately circadian review. It occurs once every 17 years. Maybe the regional board's a little better, but so it's really good to queue these things up and to start thinking about them and use the appropriate process to do so. But these are important issues that have been deferred for a long time. So whatever the appropriate way is to capture that and to start addressing it in the work plans and reports, I would encourage you to do so.
Thank you. Closing statement by staff.
Yes, Dr. Longley. I'm going to go ahead and run through this. just to start this out, you know, we as staff have, you know, approaching this order are also very concerned with these issues that have been brought up today, concerned with the wetlands. But on the flip side, there's a demonstrated successful program here. There's been reductions of selenium in the amount of 90 to 95% since inception of the program. 82% of the volume discharge has been reduced, and 77% of the salt. So I want to keep that, you know, in front of us as we contemplate this order. The order is fully enforceable. It implements our basin plan. It also implements the use agreement that you just heard about from Mr. Corey. You know, we have a monitoring program as part of that order. We will be working with the West Side Coalition to ensure those wetlands are monitored appropriately. And as from what we heard today, we'll also be keeping the board up to date. And one thing I'd offer up is an annual information item on this program to keep you up to date on what we've been doing, where they are at, what we received as far as monitoring goes. With that, I'd recommend adoption of the order with late revisions and striking Prohibition 4.
Thank you. And I'll take recommendation by the executive officer.
Sorry, I agree with Adam's recommendation.
Thank you. I'll close the hearing then and entertain a motion to approve the WDR with amendments. Discussion. And does somebody want to make a motion?
It sounds like this is a negotiated agreement. There seems to be general agreement. Nothing's perfect, but it does seem to be protective water quality. So with that, I'm glad to make the motion with the late revisions and amendments.
Do I have a second to that?
I'll second the motion.
Carmen's made the motion. Denise has seconded it. Any discussion? Hearing none, call the roll.
Mr. Schneider? Ms. Ramirez? Mr. Costantino? Ms. Cordova?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Before we recess for lunch, do we have any business to discuss?
There's no closed session items during lunch today.
No closed session items. When can we reasonably be back here for the next item? No, I'm asking for advice from the advisory group. I mean, you.
How fast can you eat your lunch?
That's right. Can we get a blender?
Let's try to be back here 10 after. That's a good compromise.
Okay.